Hey guys, tonight we're going way back before phones, before microwaves, before even indoor plumbing was a thing people could reliably count on. You're walking the uneven cobbled streets of ancient Rome. You smell wood smoke, hear donkeys braying, and somewhere in the distance someone yelling in Latin about overpriced fish. You've got sand in your sandals and very little in your pocket. But don't worry, you're going to change the world. Or at least try to before, getting stabbed a bunch of times in a toga. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, where are you tuning in from and what time is it where you are? Drop that in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born Gaius Julius Caesar in 100 BCE, in a Rome that's groaning under the weight of its own contradictions. The Republic has ruled for centuries, but it's tired. Corruption is rampant. The rich are gorging themselves while the poor fester in crumbling tenements, and soldiers fight not for Rome but for the generals who promised them land. And you're part of a noble but broke family, the Julii. Old name, ancient prestige, very little actual cash. Your dad holds a modest office and your mum, Aurelia, has more backbone than half the Senate put together. You're not exactly set up for a life of greatness, but you do have one thing, the name. That Julius carries some weight, and your family traces its roots back to Aeneas, the mythical Trojan prince, and supposedly even to Venus herself. It's a great backstory. Whether it's true or not, well, that's a debate for the poets and the skeptical historians. You grow up watching Rome from the sidelines, studying rhetoric, law, and the art of political schmoozing. You're sharp. You know when to talk, when to shut up, and when to flash a charming smile. But even as a teenager, you're seeing how the system's broken. The Senate is mostly old men with pockets full of bribes, the poor are starving, and the city's democracy is more of a screaming match between rival street gangs, loyal to politicians with expensive haircuts and private militias. And then, everything changes. You're 16 when your father suddenly dies. Boom. Just like that, you're the man of the house. Not ideal. It's 85 BCE, and the Republic is teetering under the iron-fisted rule of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a general turned dictator who's decided the best way to restore order is with hit lists and mass executions. Sulla has proscriptions, basically legal assassination lists, and your name is suddenly on his radar. Why? Because you're related to Marius, his dead enemy, and you won't give up your position as Flamen Dirlis, High Priest of Jupiter. You're a teenager, barely old enough to grow a respectable beard, and Rome's most dangerous man wants you gone. So what do? You vanish, disappear, go off-grid. You ditch Rome, change your clothes, and start bouncing between hiding spots in the countryside. You're hunted, broke, and sick at one point. Some historians say you had malaria, others say dysentery. Either way, you look like death warmed over. But you survive. Thanks in part to your mum pulling strings and your refusal to die just yet, Sulla eventually lets you live, reportedly muttering, "There are many Mariuses in this Caesar." Not exactly comforting, but you take it. Once the heat dies down, you start rebuilding. You head east, away from Rome, and begin the long grind of military service. You fight in Asia Minor where you're recognized for raw courage, saving a commander's life, rallying troops under fire, and generally being that guy who somehow stays alive while everything explodes around him. You also do something unusual. You ask for a civic crown, the Roman version of a Medal of Honor for your actions. It's bold. Some say cocky, but it works. People notice. And it's out here, far from the Senate, where you start shaping yourself. You study philosophy in Rhodes. You polish your rhetoric until your speeches can make people weep or riot, depending on your goal. You surround yourself with thinkers, soldiers, poets, and maybe a few morally ambiguous types. You're building a network, not just friends, but future favours. Here's something fun, and a little absurd. On your way to Rhodes, you get kidnapped by pirates, real ones. They're like, "Okay, ransom, 20 talents. And you, with all the ego of a man not yet stabbed 23 times in a marble hall, laugh and say, "I'm worth at least 50. They up the price. You spend weeks in captivity, joking with your captors, writing bad poetry, and warning them that once you're free, you're coming back to crucify them. They laugh. You get ransomed. You keep your promise. You raise a small navy, hunt them down, and crucify the lot. Though, in a twist of weird compassion, you slit their throats first to spare them the worst. Moral: never underestimate a Roman with petty energy and a long memory. By the time you return to Rome, you've got the makings of something dangerous. A man who knows both high society and low cunning. You're broke, yes. But you're ambitious, charming, well-connected, and just unhinged enough to pull off something big. The Republic doesn't know it yet, but you're not just a survivor anymore. You're a contender. Still, the question that nags at you most isn't just how to gain power. It's how to hold it in a place where everyone's watching, everyone's plotting, and the knives are never too far from your back. You're back in Rome now, skin a little darker from the eastern sun, eyes a little sharper, and with a quiet fire simmering behind your charm. You walk into the city with no fortune, but all the ambition in the world. Rome, of course, is still a boiling pot of corruption and ego. The streets are clogged with beggars, political thugs, and vendors screaming over each other. The Senate's still full of men who care more about their own property than the republic they supposedly serve. But you're thinking bigger. And right away, you're playing the game. Not cautiously, not politely, boldly. You align yourself with the populares, the faction that claims to support the common people over the aristocratic elite. But let's be honest, supporting the people in Rome means giving out free grain and putting on wild gladiator shows so everyone forgets they're being slowly bled dry by the system. You give the people bread and blood, and they give you cheers and votes. It works. You start with the minor offices, quaestor, aedile, each one giving you more visibility and a bit more clout. But you don't just hold office, you dazzle. As aedile, you throw games so extravagant that people are still talking about them decades later. You go into massive debt to do it, but it's calculated. Every gold coin spent is a step closer to power, and Rome eats it up. They love the show, the animals, the chariots, the fountains of wine. You're not just running for office, you're starring in your own political theatre. Of course, none of this pleases the Senate. They see you spending money you don't have, courting the mob, and generally acting like a man who wants to be king in a republic that killed its last king over 400 years ago. But you smile, flatter, and keep moving forward. You know how to disarm a room. Just enough charm, just enough feigned humility. Here's the historical fact tucked in all this glitter. Even as early as your aedileship, whispers start. This Caesar, he wants more. The Senate senses the storm coming, but they still think they can outmaneuver you. They still think you're just another ambitious man who'll flame out or get bought off. Spoiler alert, they're wrong. Now, around this time, your personal life also starts getting very Roman. You've been married a couple times already, first to Cornelia, then to Pompeia, whose scandal during the festival of Bona Dea leads to one of your most famous lines. When she's accused of improper conduct, you divorce her, not because you believe she did anything, but because, in your words, Caesar's wife must be above suspicion. It's brutal and calculated. You're not playing for romance, you're playing for optics. But while your wives come and go, your real marriage is to politics. And the next move on the chessboard is the highest priesthood in Rome, Pontifex Maximus. It's prestigious, powerful, and just the kind of post you'd need to lock in long-term influence. Everyone expects a more respectable senator to win it. You, meanwhile, are broke and flashy, yet somehow you win. It shocks the establishment and cements your image as someone who can pull off the impossible. Here's where the fringe. Fact slides in. Some ancient sources say you won the priesthood not just with bribes, but with occult rituals and secret rites, adding to the later rumours that you had divine blood or even mystical insight. Whether it was money, sorcery, or sheer charisma, the result is the same. You're no longer just an upstart politician. You're the head priest of the Roman state religion. You've gone from outlaw teenager to spiritual figurehead, and now, with the robes of Pontifex Maximus still warm on your shoulders, you set your sights on the next level, praetor, then consul. But to get there, and to truly crack open the gates of power, you'll need allies. That's where two names enter the picture, Crassus and Pompey. Marcus Licinius. Crassus is Rome's wealthiest man. Like, obscenely wealthy. He owns entire city blocks, firefighting squads that only help if you agree to sell your burning house, and enough influence to make senators sweat. But he's unpopular and needs someone like you. Charismatic, beloved by the masses. And then there's Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great. He's a war hero, celebrated general, and very much aware of his own magnificence. But despite his fame, he struggles with the Senate's elite, who view him as a jumped-up soldier. He needs someone to help push his agenda through the system. You, Crassus, and Pompey form what will later be called the First Triumvirate, an informal alliance between three ambitious men who can't stand the Senate, but definitely can use each other. It's shaky, full of ego, and destined to collapse. But for now, it works. You bring the popular support. Crassus brings money. Pompey brings military prestige. And together, you break the system. You push through laws, bypass opposition, and set up a year that will define everything that follows. In 59 BCE, you're elected consul, one of the two top officials in the Roman Republic. But rather than sharing power politely with your co-consul Bibulus, you basically shove him aside. When he tries to block your reforms, you have mobs chase him off the forum. For the rest of the year, he hides at home, claiming the heavens are unfavourable. The joke in Rome becomes that the year isn't ruled by Caesar and Bibulus, but by Caesar and Caesar. And let's pause there for a scholarly debate. Was the triumvirate a clever power-sharing move born of necessity, or the beginning of the Republic's end? Some historians argue it was a response to Senate gridlock. Others say it was a hostile takeover disguised as cooperation. Either way, it lets you pass land reforms for Pompey's veterans, tax cuts for Crassus's clients, and, of course, a special 5-year command for yourself in Gaul. Because you're not done yet, not even close. By the end of your consulship, you're rich with alliances, hated by the Senate, adored by the people, and headed north to conquer a region no Roman has ever fully tamed. It's the next act in your story, a brutal, brilliant military campaign that will make your name a legend. But as you ride out of Rome in gleaming armour, remember this: the Senate's watching. And they're starting to realise you're not just another ambitious politician, you're something else, something dangerous. You're heading north now into wild territory that most Romans think of as barbarian hell. Gaul. It's not just one place. It's a sprawling mess of forests, mountains, river valleys, and tribal warbands who'd rather cut your head off than listen to another speech about the glory of Rome. But to you, it's a blank canvas, a vast untamed opportunity. You've just secured a 5-year proconsular command in Cisalpine and Transalpine Gaul, plus Illyricum thrown in for good measure. That means armies, authority, and most importantly, freedom from the Senate's grubby little fingers. The year is 58 BCE. You arrive in Gaul with legions at your back, debt still nipping at your heels, and the kind of ambition that eats through everything in its path. You know that if you can conquer this place, the riches, glory, and political leverage it brings will catapult you to the heights of Roman power. So you don't waste time. The Helvetii, a migrating tribe trying to cross Roman territory, become your first target. You crush them. Not just for military reasons, but because you need a bold start, a headline grabber. And it works. Rome is talking. Then it's the Germans under Ariovistus. He's big, scary, and undefeated. You march your legions against him anyway, and when you win, people start whispering that you're not just lucky. You might be favoured by the gods. And those whispers, you feed them. You write Commentari de Bello Gallico, the commentaries on the Gallic War. It's a self-authored war blog in elegant Latin, making you the protagonist of a grand Roman epic. Every battle, every decision, every near-death moment, you shape it all into a tale of discipline, destiny, and Roman greatness, with you squarely at the centre. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how clever this is. While other generals fight and hope someone notices, you're building your own legend in real time. Copies of your commentaries circulate back in Rome, read aloud in forums and drawing rooms. The people adore you. Even your enemies grudgingly admit you've got style. The Gallic Wars stretch over years and the brutality only deepens. You siege walled cities, flood tunnels, starve out entire populations. You sell captured tribes into slavery by the tens of thousands. And when they rise up again, and they always do, you crush them harder. By 52 BCE, you face your greatest challenge, Vercingetorix, a Gallic chieftain who unites several tribes under one banner. He's young, smart, and understands Roman tactics frighteningly well. The final showdown comes at Alesia, a fortress on a hill surrounded by plains. This battle is a masterclass. You don't just attack Alesia, you trap it. You build massive fortifications all the way around it, cutting the city off from outside help. Then you double it, building another wall outward to protect your troops from a relieving Gallic army. It's a siege within a siege. Weeks pass. Your soldiers suffer from hunger, disease, and constant attacks, but you hold. Finally, the Gallic reinforcements break. Vercingetorix surrenders, and you take him prisoner. He'll spend years in chains before you parade him through Rome and strangle him in a dark prison cell. Standard Roman victory party. Here's a quirky detail you might enjoy. Some ancient sources claim that after his surrender, Vercingetorix threw down his weapons dramatically at your feet without saying a word, as if he were performing in a tragic play. You, naturally, didn't flinch. It's moments like these that turn a general into a myth. Of course, all this glory doesn't come without costs. Your soldiers adore you, they'd follow you into hell. But the Senate, they're starting to panic. You've become too powerful, too independent, and too beloved by the masses. Every victory in Gaul is another nail in the Republic's coffin, or at least that's how some of your enemies see it. Chief among them, your former ally Pompey. Yeah, remember him? Back when you three ruled the Triumvirate, things worked because everyone got what they wanted. But now Crassus is dead, killed in 53 BCE during a disastrous campaign in Parthia. The man who once drowned in gold dies trying to prove he could lead armies too. Without him, the balance collapses, and with you off conquering Gaul, Pompey slowly drifts toward the Senate, cozying up to the Optimates, the aristocratic faction who hate your guts. And just to add some flavour to the growing tension, there's a scholarly debate worth considering. Did the Gallic Wars need to happen? Some argue it was pure aggression, an imperialist land grab dressed up in noble rhetoric. Others say the tribes posed a real threat, and Rome had no choice but to secure its borders. The truth, as usual, probably sits somewhere in between. But for you, it was never just about defence. It was about power, prestige, and proving to everyone that Gaius Julius Caesar doesn't just play the game, he rewrites the rules. Now let's talk numbers. Over the course of your Gallic campaigns, it's estimated you killed or enslaved over 1 million people. 1 million. That's not hyperbole. That's what you wrote in your own commentaries. Though some modern historians debate the accuracy of those numbers, there's no doubt your wars were brutal. You turned entire cultures into footnotes, entire cities into rubble. And Rome applauded, but eventually the war ends, Gaul is conquered, you've won, and now you face your biggest challenge yet. Not a barbarian army or a clever chieftain, but a simple legal technicality. Your term as governor is ending. According to Roman law, if you return to Rome as a private citizen, you can be prosecuted for the various technical crimes you committed during your consulship, like, say, overriding the Senate, inciting mobs, and ignoring augurs. Basically, the second you step back into Rome without legal immunity, your enemies will pounce. So you send a request, you want to run for consul again, but in absentia, from outside the city. The Senate says no. Pompey, now squarely against you, backs that decision. It's a trap, and you know it. Your options narrow to two. Walk into Rome unarmed and be destroyed politically, maybe even executed, or march on the city with your army. You're standing now at the banks of the Rubicon River, a small, shallow stream that marks the boundary between your province and Italy proper. Crossing it with an army is treason, a death sentence. But you look back at your men, tough, loyal, blooded, and you realise there's no going back. You make the decision that will change history. You cross the Rubicon, and the Republic starts to bleed. The sound your boots make as you cross the Rubicon isn't thunderous. It's just a splash, maybe a slosh of water on leather. Nothing dramatic. But in that moment, you break a sacred Roman law. Generals are forbidden to bring their armies into Italy. You do it anyway. There's no dramatic speech, no fireworks, just a quiet, fatal certainty. You've made your move, and there's no way to unmake it. Civil war has begun. Rome, when it hears what you've done, doesn't cheer, it panics. Senators scramble to pack their belongings, their mistresses, and their ledgers full of shady deals. Pompey, The great general suddenly finds himself at the centre of a fast-moving disaster. You're coming, and he knows exactly what that means. He doesn't stay to fight. He flees, along with most of the Senate, heading south, then east toward Greece. They leave behind gold, unfinished meals, even their pets. Rome is yours, for now. But don't get too comfortable. You're not here to squat in empty buildings. You're here to consolidate. You act fast. You seize the treasury. You reassure the people, who, to be honest, mostly love you anyway, and you chase your enemies across the sea. Because you know Pompey. You know he'll gather troops. You know he's not done. Here's the fact they don't teach in school. You offer Pompey a peaceful resolution. You send letters. You propose compromise. But he refuses. The Senate too. They'd rather gamble the Republic on one big battle than let you gain more legitimacy. So be it. You march through Italy like it's your personal backyard. Cities surrender without a fight. Your soldiers are efficient and for the most part disciplined. You leave food stores intact. You give orders to respect civilians. It's part of the brand. You're not just a conqueror, you're the merciful one. The liberator. The one who's saving Rome from its own incompetence. But still, you need a real showdown. You sail to Greece, where Pompey has assembled an army that outnumbers yours. He's got ships, supply lines, and the Senate's desperate backing. The two of you face off in a series of skirmishes, all leading to the inevitable clash at Pharsalus in 48 BCE. Pharsalus is a mess. Your men are outnumbered, but they're veterans, hardened from years of fighting in Gaul. Pompey's troops? Fresher, flashier, but green. He has the edge on paper, but on the field you outmaneuver him. You break his cavalry, his pride and joy, and then roll up his flanks. It's textbook. Brutal, elegant, and final. Pompey flees. His dreams of glory shattered, he heads to Egypt, hoping to find sanctuary. But this is where the fringe history kicks in, because Egypt, in its own twisted way, wants to impress you. So when Pompey steps off his ship, he's greeted not by allies, but by assassins. They stab him, behead him, and present his head to you like it's a gift, a grotesque trophy. And here's the thing. You're horrified. Not because you loved Pompey, those days are long gone, but because it's a disgusting breach of honour. Your rival deserved a proper Roman death. You weep, reportedly. You take his seal ring and you mourn him publicly. Whether it's grief or performance, it's effective. You come out looking like a noble Roman who still plays by some rules, but you're not leaving Egypt yet. Oh no, because waiting in Alexandria is a young queen named Cleopatra, and you, of course, can't resist a good plot twist. Cleopatra is 21, sharp as a dagger, and knee-deep in a family power struggle. She's been exiled by her own brother, technically co-ruler of Egypt. You're fresh off a civil war, powerful, single, and very much in the mood to decide who runs Egypt. So naturally she smuggles herself into the palace, wrapped in a rug according to legend, and when you unroll it, there she is. Perfumed, poised, and very much in control. The two of you strike an immediate chord. You like powerful people. She likes dangerous men, and in each other you see tools, and maybe a little more. But Egypt is chaos. Cleopatra's brother isn't thrilled about your new alliance, and soon the city descends into war. You find yourself besieged in the royal quarter, fighting off an angry mob and some very unfriendly troops. The scholarly debate here is whether you underestimated Egypt or just didn't care. Either way, it takes reinforcements to pull you out of the mess. You win. Cleopatra gets the throne. And you? You get a long, exotic vacation. You stay in Egypt for months. You cruise the Nile on a golden barge, dressed like an Eastern god. You and Cleopatra dine, drink, and allegedly get very creative in terms of royal leisure. You even leave behind a little souvenir, a sun, Caesarion. Though back in Rome, no one's officially acknowledging that particular detail. When you finally return to Rome in 47 BCE, the Republic is shattered. But your enemies? Not quite extinct. There are still holdouts in Africa, including the remnants of Pompey's faction. So off you go again, into battle at Thapsus. You crush them. One of the casualties, Cato the Younger, Rome's most stubborn defender of the Republic. He doesn't let you capture him. He kills himself. In a world where political enemies usually end up strangled in dungeons, Cato's self-inflicted death becomes a symbol of virtue, resistance, and a whole lot of stubborn pride. Now let's slide in a quirky detail. After Thapsus, you suffer from an episode of uncontrollable laughter. No one knows why. Some say it's relief, others claim it's stress, and a few whisper that you're cracking under the weight of power. It's not the only strange behaviour either. You start talking about destiny, about fate. You're more generous to your enemies, more interested in titles. You're changing. By 46 BCE, you return to Rome, not just as victor, but as a ruler. The Senate, broken and afraid, makes you dictator, not temporarily, not just in a crisis, but longer, then longer still, eventually, for life. You parade your victories in grand triumphs. Elephants march down the boulevards. Prisoners from Gaul, Africa and Egypt are chained behind your chariot. You wear a purple robe, a golden laurel, and sit on a throne. You name yourself Father of the Country. You pack the Senate with loyalists, pass reforms, reorganize the calendar, you know, the one we still use, January, February, March. Thank Julius Caesar for that. But with every new title, with every marble statue and golden coin bearing your face, the air around you thickens. The old guard, the true believers in the Republic, they're watching. They see a man inching toward monarchy, and if there's one thing the Roman elite hates more than anything, it's a king. You're on top now, but the knives are sharpening. You wake up to find yourself the most powerful man in the world. The crown doesn't sit on your head, yet, but it hovers somewhere just above it, visible to all. You've beaten every rival, outlived every rebellion, and reshaped the Roman Republic into something entirely new. But instead of hiding behind the illusion of shared power, you do something bold. You drop the pretense. In 44 BCE, you accept the title Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life. You don't sneak it through the back door. You announce it. You commission statues of yourself in divine poses. You let your face appear on coins, something usually reserved for the gods and dead heroes. And you start wearing red boots, a subtle nod to the ancient kings of Rome. You're not exactly calling yourself a monarch, but you're circling the word like a lion around fresh meat. Now, let's zoom in on something interesting here. The Senate still exists. The forms of the Republic still stand. Technically, they're voting on things. But in reality, most of those senators owe their positions, their wealth, or their lives to you. You've packed the chamber with loyalists. You've increased the number of senators, flooding the place to dilute the influence of the old guard. You've clipped the wings of the assemblies, taken over the treasury, and made yourself chief priest, consul, and dictator all at once. Rome isn't a republic anymore. It's a one-man show with a very elaborate set, and yet you still talk about preserving the republic. You smile and insist it's all temporary, all for the good of Rome. You make reforms, real ones. You improve the calendar, overhaul the debt laws, rebuild cities, offer citizenship to those outside Italy. You genuinely do a lot of good. But it's not democracy. It's efficient, enlightened despotism, and the people love it. But not everyone's impressed. In the marble corridors of the Senate, a storm is brewing. It's quiet, almost polite, but it's there. The older senators, the ones who remember the Republic in its prime, they're whispering. Men like Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, who once fought against you, then submitted to you, now sit in the Senate watching you act more and more like a god, and it makes their skin crawl. The real irony? You trust them, especially Brutus. You forgive him for siding with Pompey. You welcome him back into politics, elevate him, praise him. You even claim you descend from Aeneas, and that Brutus descends from the Brutus who helped expel the last king of Rome. That myth matters to you. You're a history buff, and you know the weight of symbolism. It's almost poetic. You, the dictator, elevating the descendant of the man who killed the king. What could go wrong? Let's slide in a quirky fringe fact. Around this time, a temple is being built in your honour, while you're alive. That's not normal, even for Rome. You're being worshipped in public ceremonies. Priests are offering sacrifices in your name. Some senators are horrified, others are confused, and a few, honestly, are just jealous. Now, here's a scholarly debate that still stirs the dust in academia. Did you truly want to be king? Or were you simply baiting your enemies, seeing who would flinch? Some say you rejected the crown 3 times at the Lupercalia festival as a gesture of humility. Others argue it was pure theatre, designed to test the waters. Either way, when Mark Antony, your loyal friend, tries to crown you in public and you refuse it, the damage is already done. The crowd cheers, but not everyone is clapping. What you don't fully grasp, or maybe you do and just don't care, is that your actions are waking up Rome's deepest political trauma. Rome hated kings. That's how the Republic was born, in the ashes of monarchy. The very word rex, king, sends a chill down every senator's spine. And even though you're not using the word, everything you're doing feels like monarchy. You start making decisions without consulting anyone. You pass laws from your chair. You're planning military campaigns to Parthia without Senate approval. You don't even rise when the senators enter the chamber anymore. You used to. You used to play the humble part. Now, you barely pretend, and they notice. One day, a senator places a diadem, a king's band, on your statue. You have it taken down. Another tries to call you Rex in public. The crowd boos. You laugh it off. But it's clear you're dancing on a knife's edge, and the Republic's defenders are sharpening blades behind closed doors. Meanwhile, the people of Rome are still mostly on your side. They're eating better. The games are good. The streets are safer. You're popular. You're beloved. But you're also terrifying to the people who once held real power. The Senate used to be the heart of Rome. Now it's a body waiting for the next command from a man in red boots. Let's talk about your personal schedule for a moment. You've become restless. You're planning to leave for Parthia. Soon. Maybe even next month. You want to avenge Crassus's humiliating defeat. You want one more grand campaign. One more piece of glory. You've even started planning who will rule in your absence. You think you have time, but you don't. You attend the Senate regularly now, despite the warning signs. Omens are stacking up. Strange dreams, lightning storms, soothsayers muttering about the Ides of March. Your wife, Calpurnia, begs you to stay home. She wakes from nightmares drenched in sweat, convinced you'll be killed. You, being Caesar, roll your eyes. Here's one last eerie little nugget. A few days before the Ides, a list of conspirators is reportedly handed to you. Someone warns you. The scroll goes unread, crumpled in your hand as you walk toward the Senate on March 15th, 44 BCE. That morning you dress as usual. The sky's clear. You head for the theatre of Pompey, where the Senate is meeting. Your enemy's too afraid to confront you in the actual Senate house. You feel powerful, maybe even untouchable. You ignore the soothsayer on the steps, the one who told you to beware the Ides. You smirk and say, "The Ides of March have come." And he replies quietly, "Aye, Caesar, but not gone." Inside, the senators rise. They greet you with smiles, handshakes, respectful nods, and behind their backs, knives. The Senate chamber isn't where you're supposed to die, or at least not like this. You've walked into plenty of rooms filled with tension before, negotiations, debates, even sieges, but today feels different. Not that you'd admit it. You don't flinch, don't show fear. You're Julius Caesar, dictator for life, crowned by victories and adored by the people. What could possibly go wrong in a room full of men you've either pardoned, promoted, or politically neutralized? The location itself should have been your first warning. The meeting isn't being held in the Senate house on the Forum. It's in the Curia of Pompey, a theatre complex still under construction. You know, the one named after the rival you crushed, whose headless body you once mourned? Yeah, that one. A weirdly poetic place for things to end. But you ignore the chill in the marble and walk in like you own the world, because, let's be honest, you basically do. The conspirators are waiting, 60 senators, not all of them hardened enemies. Some are men you've promoted, even trusted. Brutus is there, Cassius too. They're doing that awkward thing people do when they're about to betray someone. Smiling too wide, pretending everything is totally fine. You nod back, amused by their stiffness. You're so used to commanding rooms, it doesn't occur to you that today, you might not be the one holding the reins. Someone steps forward with a petition. That's the signal. The choreography's rehearsed. Distract you, crowd you, then strike. And they do. The first blade doesn't kill you. It's a shallow cut, right to the shoulder. You whirl around, confused, maybe even thinking it's a joke. Another strike hits you in the ribs. Then the chaos begins. Hands grab your toga, men shout. Blades flash in the morning light. You don't even have time to draw your dagger. The room erupts into a storm of betrayal, and you, the conqueror of Gaul, the vanquisher of Pompey, the man who outwitted everyone, you are just a bleeding man in a corner, being murdered by a committee. Here's the chilling historical fact. You are stabbed 23 times. And according to Suetonius, only one of those wounds, right to the chest, is actually fatal. The others are frantic, shallow, slashes from men who can't believe what they're doing or can't bear to look you in the eyes while they do it. The scene is less a clean execution and more a messy, panicked groupthink horror show. You try to stand, you fall, you try to speak, but blood fills your mouth. And then Brutus steps forward. You see him, really see him. The man you trusted, raised politically, treated like a son. His blade joins the others, and here's the most quoted line in Roman history. Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus? Maybe you say it, maybe you don't. Some sources claim you fall silent, heartbroken, and simply pull your toga over your head, your last gesture of Roman dignity. Others say the words were pure invention, dramatic license for a moment already soaked in betrayal. That's one of the great scholarly debates, by the way. Did you actually speak those words, or is it just Shakespeare doing his thing 16 centuries later? Either way, the impact lands. In that instant, you understand everything. It's not just a murder, it's a declaration. The republic you thought you had reshaped has stabbed you in the back. When it's over, your body lies in a pool of blood beneath the statue of Pompey, your old enemy, whose name now watches over your fall like a silent ghost. The senators flee, dropping daggers and fleeing the scene like guilty schoolboys. The Curia echoes with silence. Outside, Rome waits. The people expect news, but not this kind of news. Let's pause and explore a fringe historical detail. One version claims that a doctor, Antistius, examines your body and determines that only one of the 23 wounds was deadly. That single blow between the shoulder and neck stopped your heart. If that's true, it means you died slowly, fully aware, surrounded by betrayal and blood, choking on the irony. And now the city explodes. The conspirators, Brutus, Cassius, and the rest, believed that once you were gone, the Republic would magically heal. They thought you were the disease, not the symptom. They imagined that after one dramatic murder, the Senate would cheer, the people would applaud, and everyone would go back to arguing over tax reforms and temple repairs. Wrong. The minute word spreads that you've been assassinated, the city goes still. Then it roars. Your supporters, men like Mark Antony, who was supposed to be detained during the murder but escaped, begin rallying the crowd. The people, the veterans, the plebs, they loved you. You gave them food, games, reforms. You were the first politician who actually gave a damn whether they starved. And now you're dead, cut down by rich men in togas. They don't take it well. Your will is read publicly a few days later. It turns out you left money, to every citizen of Rome. 300 sesterces each. You even left your private gardens for public use. It's your last mic drop and it lands like a thunderclap. The people mourn you not just as a leader, but as a father, a benefactor, a god. And that's when Mark Antony strikes. At your funeral he gives a speech. No microphones, no spotlights, just raw fury and perfect oratory. He describes your triumphs, your generosity, your victories. Then, in a masterful performance, he lifts your bloodied cloak for the crowd to see. The holes, the stains, the evidence. It's theatre, yes, but it's also fuel. Rome ignites. Riots break out. Mobs hunt the conspirators. The senators who once imagined themselves saviours are now hunted fugitives. Brutus and Cassius flee the city, planning to regroup. But they know the tide has turned. Your death didn't kill ambition. It fed it. Here's a weird little footnote. During the chaos, someone, maybe a random rioter, maybe a loyalist, builds an altar on the spot where your body was burned in the forum. People start leaving flowers, coins, prayers. Some even claim to see omens, spirits, visions of your face in the smoke. You, the man who wrote his own legend, are now something bigger than mortal. You are myth. But your story isn't over. In fact, your death is just the intermission. Rome doesn't sleep the night they burn your body. The flames rise in the Forum like a second sun, casting long flickering shadows over marble columns and blood-stained stone. Citizens crowd around, some weeping, others shouting, many just stunned. Your pyre becomes a public shrine before it's even cold. People toss in offerings, flowers, coins, military decorations, bits of poetry scribbled on scraps of parchment. Some even throw in their own clothing or jewellery, as if giving up worldly things might somehow bring you back. You, who lived so loudly, are now just ash and legend. But here's the twist. Your death doesn't kill the ambition you represented, it detonates it. In the days that follow, the so-called liberators, Brutus, Cassius, and their very confused gang, realize they have wildly misread the room. They thought the people would welcome them as heroes for saving the Republic. Instead, the people spit at them, literally. Graffiti pops up calling them traitors, cowards, backstabbers. Brutus, whose ancestors helped kill Rome's last king, had hoped to channel that legacy. But all he's managed to do is kill the one man most Romans felt actually got things done. So what do the assassins do? They bail. First to the Capitoline Hill, then out of the city entirely. They scatter like mice from a collapsing temple, heading east to regroup in friendly territory. They still believe they can salvage this. They still think Rome wants its republic back. Meanwhile, in the smouldering heart of the city, your former allies are already elbowing each other for a piece of the future. At the front of the pack, Mark Antony. You remember him, the heavy-drinking, heavy-fighting general with a taste for drama and zero patience for subtlety. He's been your right-hand man in war and politics, and now that you're gone, he moves fast. He seizes control of the state treasury. He calls meetings, delivers rousing speeches, and tries to cast himself as your natural heir. But Antony has a problem. Or rather, you left him one. A name. Gaius Octavius. Your great-nephew. 19 years old. Thin, sickly-looking and very quiet. Barely a shadow in the corner of your grand marble life. And yet, you adopted him in your will. Posthumously. That means everything. In Rome, adoption isn't just legal paperwork, it's legacy, it's destiny. You left him your name, your fortune, your political machine. So now, the teenager with the soft voice becomes Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, and suddenly everyone in Rome is watching him, waiting, judging. Here's the historical fact. Octavian isn't a warrior. He's no gladiator. He doesn't make speeches that shake the heavens or win battles with fire and blood. What he has is strategy, patience, and a killer instinct so cold it could freeze the Tiber. He understands that optics matter, that law and tradition still have weight, even if everyone's ignoring them. He plays the long game. He arrives in Rome with no army, just a handful of loyal friends and the legal authority of your will. Antony laughs him off at first. Who wouldn't? He's a kid. Pale. Frail. Looks like he should be organising scrolls, not running an empire, but Octavian doesn't care what Antony thinks. He visits the Forum, stands by your altar, distributes the money you promised the people out of his own pocket. The people notice. So do the legions. And here comes the quirky fringe fact. Octavian starts calling himself Caesar's son, even though technically it's an adoption. But Rome loves a story. It loves bloodlines. He even claims he saw a comet during your funeral games, a blazing star that streaked across the sky. People say it was your soul ascending to the heavens, a sign that you've become a god. Octavian leans in hard. He puts that star on his coins, on his banners, the son of the divine Julius, Divi Filius, a god's heir, walking the earth in a neat little toga. Antony, meanwhile, is starting to sweat. His grip on power is slipping. The Senate is wary of him. The people are drifting toward Octavian. And the army? The army starts swearing loyalty to the boy. You can practically hear the gears grinding in Antony's head. He needs backup, so he cuts a deal with the Senate. Specifically with a man named Cicero. Yes, that's Cicero. The old orator who once hated your guts, then kind of respected you, then hated you again. Cicero sees Octavian as a useful pawn to check Antony's ambition. He floods the Senate with speeches, the Philippics, ripping Antony apart with brutal rhetoric. It's delicious stuff, full of venom and classical flourishes. Antony in return threatens violence. Subtle diplomacy was never really his thing. Octavian plays it cooler. He lets the old men fight, then gathers support from another corner. Lepidus, a wealthy general with legions of his own. And just like that, the power vacuum you left starts to fill, again with the triumvirate. The second triumvirate, to be precise. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus form a legal, three-headed political monster. Their first order of business? Blood. They draft prescriptions, lists of enemies to be executed, lands seized, and families destroyed. Sound familiar? It's a throwback to Sulla's old days. The purges begin. Anyone who backed the wrong side, who supported Brutus or whispered against Caesar, gets hunted down. Heads are displayed in the forum. Wealth is redistributed. Rome becomes a city of whispered names and sudden disappearances. And yes, one of the victims is Cicero. Antony never forgives the speeches. When they catch him, the soldiers reportedly cut off his hands and tongue, the tools of his oratory, and nail them to the speaker's platform. Brutal, theatrical, and totally Roman. Meanwhile, Brutus and Cassius are building their own power base in the east, raising legions, rallying cities. They know the triumvirs will come for them, and they're getting ready. You'd probably admire the boldness if you weren't too busy being dead and worshipped. And here's a scholarly debate worth mentioning. Was the second triumvirate ever meant to last? Or was it always a temporary alliance of mutual convenience waiting to implode? Some historians argue that the seeds of betrayal were baked into its DNA. Three men with armies and ambition don't make for a stable democracy. They make for a very short-lived truce. But for now, the new alliance holds. They divide the Roman world like slices of a sacrificial ox. Octavian gets the west, Antony gets the east, Lepidus gets Africa, basically the leftover bone, and together they prepare for the ultimate reckoning. The Battle of the Republic isn't over. It's just changing shape. You're gone, sure, but your shadow still stretches over every forum, every coin, every sword. They killed you to save the Republic, and in doing so, they doomed it. Because now Caesar isn't a man, it's a title. You'd think that after everything, the wars, the assassinations, the purges, the funeral riots, Rome might take a breather. Maybe pour a glass of wine, clean the blood off the forum steps and collectively exhale. But that's not how Rome works. Not anymore. With your ashes barely cooled, the men who inherited your world are racing toward yet another clash. The second triumvirate, forged in blood and political necessity, isn't built to last. It's built to kill. And the first name on that death list? Brutus. Yes, that Brutus. The one who stood over your dying body, dagger in hand, toga drenched in betrayal. He's in the east now, with Cassius, raising legions, gathering allies, and writing self-righteous letters about restoring liberty. He still clings to the fantasy that killing you saved Rome, not shattered it. But no matter how many times he invokes the noble republic, the truth is sinking in. Nobody's cheering for the old system anymore, so the triumvirs prepare for war. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus mobilize an army so vast it drinks entire provinces dry. Their target? Macedonia. More specifically, the plains near a sleepy little town called Philippi. You probably never cared much for it in life, but now it's about to become the battleground where your ghost watches from every blade, every shield, every glint of armour under the autumn sun. The year is 42 BCE, 2 battles are fought here just weeks apart, and both are chaos wrapped in dust and steel. The first clash sees Cassius defeated, fatally so. He gets bad intel, thinks Brutus has lost too, and chooses death. Always a bit dramatic, that one. He falls on his sword with help from a slave. It's messy, undignified, and soaked in that peculiar Roman flavour of tragic pride. Brutus hears about it and presses on. But it's over. The second battle breaks him. His army collapses, and like his co-conspirator, he chooses suicide over surrender. Word is, he runs onto his own sword, held out by a loyal friend. If that sounds familiar, it should. It's a style of death that'll echo in future Roman tragedies. Dignified despair is the fashion of the moment, and here's the historical fact that matters. With Brutus and Cassius dead, so too dies the last real hope for the Republic. There's no Senate army anymore, no grand resistance, just a handful of refugees, old men, and stubborn philosophers still pretending the Republic can be resurrected like some senatorial Lazarus. It won't be. Meanwhile, Octavian and Antony return to their corners of the world. The alliance still holds, at least on the surface. Lepidus, true to his role as third wheel, gets sidelined almost immediately. They send him off to Africa with a pat on the back and a polite shove into irrelevance. He doesn't fight it much, he knows he's outclassed. So two giants remain: Octavian, cold and calculating master of public image, and Antony, fiery, charismatic, and increasingly distracted by the East, and by someone who never left your orbit, Cleopatra. Let's rewind for a moment. After you died, Cleopatra did what any smart ruler would do. She survived. She returned to Egypt, kept the throne, and waited. She had a child, your child, Caesarion, and raised him as the true heir of Rome's greatest man. Some believed her, others rolled their eyes. But now, with Antony wandering into her sphere, she sees her chance to climb back into the Roman game. Antony arrives in Tarsus, summoned to explain himself to the triumvirate. Instead, he's met with Cleopatra's signature entrance: golden barge, scented sails, exotic music, and a queen dressed as Isis herself. The woman knows stagecraft. Antony, predictably, is enchanted. One moment he's demanding tribute, the next he's drinking with her on a velvet couch, declaring eternal love and writing off Roman debt like it's a party favour. Now here's a quirky fact. Cleopatra supposedly had a bet with Antony that she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single meal. He scoffs, so she drops a massive pearl into vinegar, dissolves it, and drinks it. Bet won. Game, set, match. Cleopatra plays for keeps. Antony and Cleopatra become inseparable. He winters in Alexandria. They throw wild feasts, play dress-up as gods, and start merging Egyptian and Roman symbols in ways that make senators back in Rome absolutely panic. The East begins to look more like a rival empire than a loyal province. Octavian sees this and sharpens his knives. Not literal ones, not yet, but rhetorical blades. He launches a propaganda campaign unlike anything Rome's seen before. He paints Antony as a lovesick traitor, seduced by a foreign queen, betraying Roman virtues in silken bedsheets and foreign incense. He points to Caesarion and whispers, "That's not the heir. That's Cleopatra's ploy. I'm the real son." This leads to one of the great scholarly debates of the era. Did Octavian really believe Antony had gone rogue? Or did he simply see an opening to destroy his last rival? With the way he pounces, he convinces the Senate to declare war, not on Antony directly, but on Cleopatra. Smart move. Framing it as a war against a foreign power keeps everything patriotic and very Roman. The stage is set. In 31 BCE, the war comes to a head at the Battle of Actium, a naval showdown off the western coast of Greece. Octavian's fleet, commanded by his brilliant general Agrippa, blocks Antony and Cleopatra from escaping. Their ships are larger, fancier, but less manoeuvrable. It's like watching a luxury yacht try to dodge speedboats. The fighting rages for hours. Smoke, fire, shattered oars, screams over crashing waves. Then, in a sudden, shocking move, Cleopatra's fleet breaks formation and flees. Antony sees her leaving and follows. Some say it's love, others call it cowardice. Either way, it's over. Octavian wins, Rome wins. You win, again, from the grave. And here's the twist. After Actium, everything becomes inevitable. Antony and Cleopatra retreat to Alexandria. Octavian pursues. Surrounded, hopeless, Antony falls on his sword. Except, being Antony, he somehow botches it and bleeds out slowly in Cleopatra's arms. A tragic end for a man who once held the fate of Rome in his fists. Cleopatra, unwilling to be paraded through Rome in chains, follows him. The classic version has her using an asp, a venomous snake, to end her life. Some historians say it was poison hidden in a hairpin or ointment. However it happened, she dies as she lived, dramatically and on her own terms. Caesarion doesn't fare as well. Octavian has him quietly executed. The boy might have been your heir, but there's no room for another Caesar. Not when Rome already has a new one. The Republic is now just a word carved into fading stone. And Rome belongs to your shadow. So here we are. The dust of Actium has settled, the queen is dead, the lover lies cold, and Egypt, the last great jewel of the ancient world, is officially annexed. Octavian strolls into Alexandria not just as a conqueror, but as a man tying up the last fraying threads of your story. No more rivals, no more inconvenient heirs, just silence, sand, and an empire practically begging for a ruler with a steady hand and a clean toga. It's 30 BCE now, and Rome, for the first time in years, isn't at war with itself. There are no more triumvirates, no opposing factions claiming legitimacy. There's just Octavian. The boy you adopted from your sister's line, the quiet one, the frail one, is now the last man standing, and he's not just your heir in name, he's become a reflection of you in the most unsettling way. Less flamboyant, less theatrical, but just as calculating, just as relentless. He didn't conquer Gaul or write commentaries, but he conquered you in death, and then he inherited everything. Back in Rome, the Senate is tired, the people are tired, everyone's been playing political musical chairs for so long that when the music finally stops, no one complains that only one man's left in the game. Octavian doesn't declare himself king. That would be suicide even now. Instead, he does something far smarter. He restores the Republic. That's right. He walks into the Senate and offers to give up his extraordinary powers like some kind of selfless civic hero. And the Senate? Oh, they panic. They beg him to stay in control. Please, for the love of the gods, don't hand power back to us. We just got the city clean again. And so Octavian becomes something new, something Rome has never seen before. Princeps, first citizen. Not a king, not officially. Just the man who always speaks first, whose opinion carries the most weight. A modest dictator, a polite god. In 27 BCE, the Senate gives him a new name, Augustus. It's not a title of office, it's a halo. It means the revered one, full of religious undertones and cosmic significance. He's no longer just Caesar's heir, he's something bigger, a stabilizer, a symbol of restored peace, a living link to the gods. And here's your legacy kicking in again. Augustus keeps your name. From now on, every Roman emperor will carry Caesar as part of their title. Not just a surname anymore, a throne. Caesar becomes shorthand for absolute power, echoed later in Kaiser, in Tsar, in every distant echo of imperial authority from Berlin to Moscow. Not bad for a guy who started off dodging Sulla's death lists. The city transforms under Augustus. You'd barely recognize it, honestly. The Forum is cleaned up, temples are restored, marble replaces crumbling brick. The government is reshaped, streamlined, professionalized. Augustus masters the art of seeming humble while holding absolute control. He turns dictatorship into a lifestyle brand. But there's still a strange silence underneath it all. A ghost in the architecture. You. Your statues still stand. Your face still appears on coins. People still talk about you, debate you. Were you a hero, a tyrant, a visionary, a traitor? It depends on who's speaking and how many cups of wine they've had. But no one forgets you. And the strange thing, even though Augustus builds his empire on your ashes, he never fully escapes your shadow. You were larger than life, louder, bolder, more vivid. You gambled with history in a way he never dared. And though he ends up with the throne, it's your story that keeps pulling people back. Now here's a fringe detail most people overlook. Augustus doesn't just co-opt your legacy, he literalizes it. He deifies you. Officially. You're declared a god by the Senate. Temples are built in your honor. Priests are appointed to serve your cult. People leave offerings at altars with your name etched in stone. You go from man to myth to Divus Julius. The divine Julius. It's not just good PR. It gives Augustus extra clout too. After all, what's more legitimate than being the son of a god? So let's pause on that for a second. You, a man who once flung mud at the Senate, seduced a queen, crucified pirates and seized Rome with an army, are now receiving sacrifices. Chickens are being slaughtered in your name. Hymns are sung to you at state functions. Your comet, Caesar's comet, the one that appeared during your funeral games, is now considered a sign from the heavens. You didn't just conquer Gaul, you conquered time. But even in divinity, you're controversial. Scholars today still argue about your legacy. Were you the man who saved Rome from self-destruction, or the egomaniac who killed its freedom? Did you bring reform or tyranny? Was the Republic already doomed before you crossed the Rubicon, or did you doom it with every step? Some point to your debt relief policies, your calendar reform, your openness to extending citizenship as signs of progressive thinking. Others look at the death toll, your prescriptions, the Gallic massacres, the civil wars, and see a ruthless opportunist who destroyed as much as he built. And then there's Cleopatra. Historians still debate whether your love for her was genuine or strategic. Was Caesarion your attempt to start a new dynasty outside Rome's control? Or just a footnote in your story, cleaned up by Augustus because it didn't fit the narrative? All of this matters less, of course, than the result. Rome is no longer a republic. Oh, they keep the names. There's still a Senate. There are still elections. But it's hollow. Power flows from one man now, passed through bloodlines and assassinations, coups and coronations. The emperor reigns, and he reigns in your name. That's the real kicker. You, who were murdered in the name of liberty, become the founding father of an empire. They killed you to stop a king from rising, and in doing so, they created a dynasty. And you know what? Rome likes it. They like the order, the games, the stability. Sure, the emperors after Augustus will range from decent to deranged. Some will burn the city, others will appoint horses to the Senate. But the system holds. Your system. Or at least the one built on your bones. Here's a weird little postscript to your legacy. Over a century later, a Roman emperor named Hadrian will stand in Gaul, staring at the site of one of your old battles. He'll raise a column there, quietly marking the spot where the Republic ended and Empire began. He doesn't build it to honour Augustus. He builds it for you. Even the emperors know. This all started with Caesar. With the man who crossed the Rubicon, seduced a queen, and died beneath the statue of his enemy. With you. You don't get to see the future, but if you could, you'd probably smirk. Or maybe roll your eyes. Hard to say. Because for all the blood, betrayal, and speeches carved into history, the grand irony is this. You weren't trying to end the Republic. You were trying to fix it. Make it work. Bend it into something that didn't wobble every time a corrupt senator threw a tantrum or a general wanted more land. You saw a broken system and tried to strong-arm it into stability. But in doing so, you cracked it beyond repair. Rome under Augustus is quiet. Too quiet. The chaos that defined your rise, the elections, the brawls, the backroom deals, is now filtered through one man. A man who speaks calmly, nods graciously, and wears power like a well-fitted cloak. But make no mistake, he rules completely. Every province, every army, every grain shipment flowing in from Egypt, he controls it all. And the people? They love it. After decades of bloodshed, they'll take order over ideology any day. And that's the strange part. You weren't always orderly. You were passion and spectacle. Rome was loud when you were alive. Full of parades and conspiracies, public feasts and whispered threats. But Augustus brings stillness, predictability. He closes the gates of the Temple of Janus, a symbol that Rome is at peace. He brags about this. A lot. Not because he's humble, but because peace finally is marketable. Still, you haunt the place. Literally. Your temple goes up in the Forum, a whole building, white marble columns and all dedicated to the divine Julius. Priests in white robes oversee rituals there. On the anniversary of your death, the Ides of March, people gather quietly to remember. Not everyone weeps, not everyone honours, but no one forgets. Even in this restored republic, your ghost sits in the back row watching. Here's a historical fact for your celestial records. Augustus doesn't have any sons, at least not ones that survive long enough to matter. So, he spends the next 2 decades grooming a series of male heirs. Stepsons, grandsons, adopted sons, each one raised to follow in his sandal steps. Most of them die. Some of them die under mysterious circumstances. It's a mess. Eventually, one man remains standing. Tiberius, the grim, moody stepson of Augustus. He's not particularly loved, he's not particularly charming, but he's capable, and more importantly, he's alive. When Augustus finally dies in 14 CE, Rome holds its breath. The transition of power, this untested handoff from emperor to heir, is a moment that could crack the whole system, but it doesn't. Tiberius steps in, a little reluctantly, and nothing collapses. The army stays loyal. The Senate, once the centre of power, nods obediently. And just like that, the Julio-Claudian dynasty begins. So let's talk about that legacy for a second. Your name, Caesar, becomes something bigger than a family label. It's now a title, not just a name passed down, but a station. Every emperor will carry it, even those with no blood connection to you. Later, emperors will be crowned Caesar Augustus, Caesar Trajan, Caesar Hadrian. In the centuries to come, your name will echo through palaces, battlefields and cathedrals. It'll get mangled into other languages, reborn as Kaiser in Germany, Tsar in Russia. The title outlives the city, outlives the empire, outlives everyone. But here's the twist, the one historians still argue over while sipping cheap espresso in dusty archives. Were you ever actually trying to be emperor? Some argue yes, that every step you took, from allying with Crassus and Pompey, to crossing the Rubicon, to accepting the crown in everything but name, was part of a grand plan to concentrate all power in your hands. That the Republic talk was just clever cover, others say no, that you saw yourself as a restorer, a repairman holding the crumbling architecture together with raw charisma and policy. That you didn't want to be king, you just didn't want the Senate to be a dysfunctional circus. And maybe both are true. Maybe you became a king by accident, or maybe by the time you realised what you'd become, it was too late to stop. Here's a fringe detail. Some Roman aristocrats continued holding tiny dinner parties on the Ides of March, not in your honour, but in Brutus's. Quiet, tasteful affairs. The kind where someone carves a roast pig and raises a glass to freedom, even as the city outside is filled with soldiers, slaves, and the looming presence of an emperor who reads every speech before it's delivered. It's the kind of rebellion that only the rich and safe can afford, nostalgia disguised as virtue. Meanwhile, the people? They remember you differently. To them, you're the man who gave them games, grain and glory, the one who conquered Gaul, humbled Pompey and brought Egypt under Roman rule. You dazzled them, made them laugh, gave them gossip and victories and monuments. You weren't perfect, no one claims that, but you were memorable, and in a world where names live longer than bodies, being unforgettable is everything. That's the real magic trick you pulled, because while the senators talked liberty and the historians debated tyranny, you were always playing a longer game. You turned yourself into a symbol, a myth, a template for power so potent that every would-be emperor for centuries would ask themselves the same question. What would Caesar do? And you know what? Most of them got it wrong. They missed the subtle parts, the charm, the timing, the instinct for when to bend and when to break. They copied your ambition, but not your precision. Some went too far, others not far enough. A few, like Caligula or Nero, made you look like a humble public servant by comparison. And yet, no matter how far the empire strayed, no matter how twisted the politics became, your name remained the gold standard. Even the Christians get tangled up in your legacy. Some see you as a villain, Rome's face during the crucifixion era. Others admire your reforms, your discipline. They debate your morality, your supposed arrogance, even your theological significance. Because when you become a god in a city that will one day crucify another man called the Son of God, things get messy. And here's a scholarly debate still cracking chalkboards wide open. If you hadn't been assassinated, would Rome have become an empire anyway? Was the fall of the Republic inevitable, or did your death push it over the edge? Some think you could have, steered it into a constitutional monarchy, a stable blend of old and new. Others argue your ego was a ticking time bomb, bound to explode no matter what. Either way, the blood on the Senate floor didn't solve anything. It just rewrote the rules. Now picture this. You're floating somewhere in the divine afterlife, maybe lounging on a cloud, or maybe just vibing in that celestial lounge reserved for deified mortals who once terrified the Senate. Either way, you're watching Rome, and it's a weird show. You've been turned into a god, yes, but not the kind with temples full of golden bulls and thunderbolts. You're the kind of god people use to justify policy, stamp coins, and prop up increasingly erratic emperors. Honestly, you probably didn't ask for this. But legacy, like politics, has a mind of its own. Down below, the emperors start getting strange. After Augustus dies peacefully, rare for Roman rulers, his successor Tiberius rules with a sort of gloomy efficiency. He's paranoid, reclusive, and definitely not a people person. He hides out on the island of Capri, surrounded by astrologers and disturbing rumours. He rules well enough, but with zero charisma. He never pretends to be you. In fact, he seems allergic to the idea of being too visible. And then comes Caligula. You wouldn't believe this guy. He starts off well, handsome, young, generous, but very quickly goes off the rails. He thinks he's a living god. He publicly impersonates Jupiter, builds golden bridges, declares war on the sea, and has his soldiers stab at waves. There's that famous fringe fact, possibly true, possibly satire, that he tried to make his horse a consul, not because the horse had political aspirations, but because Caligula wanted to humiliate the Senate. Mission accomplished. He dies violently, of course. That's the new Roman tradition. Assassination isn't political anymore, it's just how emperors exit the stage. Then comes Claudius, who's actually not terrible, despite being dismissed early on as a stammering, bookish afterthought. He conquers Britain, reforms the bureaucracy, and gives off some very unexpectedly competent uncle energy. He respects your legacy, names buildings after you, praises your vision, but he's a placeholder in a dynasty that's clearly cracking. And finally, Nero. Nero, the man who, depending on which scroll you believe, fiddled while Rome burned. He's not content with just ruling. He wants to sing, act, and race chariots in front of an audience that's legally required to clap. He stages elaborate performances, sometimes not realizing, or not caring, that real blood is being spilled off stage. He kills his mother, his wife, and most of his enemies, then eventually himself, after declaring that what an artist dies in me, a real piece of work. So, while all of this madness unfolds, one thing remains constant. Your name. Every coin, every public decree, every new ruler introduces themselves as a new Caesar. And it's not just a label, it's a legitimacy pass. They use you like a mythic measuring stick. When an emperor wants to look strong, he calls himself a Caesar. When he wants to be seen as divinely favoured, he references you and that shining star, the comet that supposedly marked your ascent to the heavens. Here's your historical fact of the night. Roman emperors begin using a formal title, Imperator Caesar Augustus. Imperator means commander. Caesar is your name. Augustus is the holy brand. It's a neat little stack of titles that says, I'm in charge, I'm divine adjacent, and I've got the receipts. But let's not forget the Senate. They still technically exist, still meet, still pretend they're important. They pass laws, give speeches, debate how many peacocks should be sacrificed before a military campaign. But no one is fooled. Rome has become a stage, the senators are background extras, and the emperor, he's the playwright, the director, and the star, whether he knows his lines or not. Meanwhile, the people are adapting. The old republican virtues, libertas, gravitas, dignitas, are slowly giving way to bread and circuses. As long as the amphitheatres are full and the aqueducts keep flowing, most Romans don't care who's sitting on the throne. Which brings us to one of the more hilarious scholarly debates. Did the Romans truly love empire, or did they just stop fighting it once it started feeding them? Some scholars argue that the Republic, with all its elections and checks and balances, was already dead long before you crossed the Rubicon, that you didn't murder it, you just gave it a proper burial. Others insist the Republic could have been saved, if only you'd laid down your power instead of grabbing more. But either way, it's you who transformed what it meant to be Roman. You gave them a new identity, one not built on senatorial privilege, but on personal loyalty, military strength and spectacle. And now, your legacy spreads beyond Rome. The empire expands to its furthest borders, the Rhine, the Danube, the sands of the Sahara, the windswept cliffs of Britain. Roads stretch like spiderwebs from Rome to every corner of the known world. Latin becomes the language of government, of law, of power, and through it all your name travels with the legions. Caesar becomes a universal word for ruler. In time, even the enemies of Rome will invoke your name when they seize power themselves. Here's a lesser-known but fascinating fringe detail. In some distant parts of the empire, local leaders begin naming their sons Caesar, not because they're related to you, but because it's seen as a lucky charm, like naming your kid Victor or Maximus. The idea is, if a child bears your name, maybe they'll inherit your strength, your cunning, your fate. A strange kind of folk superstition, that the man who was stabbed 23 times in the Senate can still bring good fortune to a peasant farmer's newborn. But not everything is glorious. The cracks begin to show. By the 2nd century CE, emperors start dying at alarming rates. Poisoning, stabbings, suspicious illnesses. Armies begin to realise they can choose emperors too, and suddenly loyalty becomes negotiable. Generals rise and fall with the favour of legions. Civil war returns like an old house guest, no one invited. The Senate becomes even more irrelevant, and emperors are no longer made in Rome, they're made on battlefields. And through it all, you remain the blueprint, the name, the ideal. Even when things fall apart, they fall apart in the shape you left behind. There's something almost tragic about it. The republic you tried to fix became an empire. The empire you never called by name became your most enduring creation. You were killed to save the system, but the system simply absorbed your ghost and kept marching forward. And in that odd, blood-soaked way, you won. Not with swords, but with symbols. Imagine this. Centuries have passed. The marble has weathered. The forum, once loud with senators shouting and sandals slapping on stone, now echoes with the low hum of tourists, traders and priests. Rome has changed, again and again. Emperors rise and fall, borders stretch and snap, temples burn, plagues sweep through the streets, and yet your name endures. It's the 3rd century CE now, and the empire is in crisis. Not a metaphorical one, an actual boiling over 50 years of chaos kind of crisis. They call it the crisis of the 3rd century, which, admittedly, lacks creativity but gets the point across. In just 5 decades, Rome cycles through over 20 emperors, most of whom die violently. Some are declared by legions, some by mobs, some by sheer accident. Most don't last long enough to unpack their things, and what do they all call themselves? Caesar. Because even as the empire cracks like an overbaked amphora, your name still signals legitimacy, still holds weight. If you want soldiers to follow you, you invoke Caesar. If you want the Senate to rubber stamp your rule, you remind them you're Caesar this or Caesar that. The name has become detached from your bloodline, long gone by now, and evolved into a brand of power. You're no longer just a historical figure, you're shorthand for authority. But let's not pretend this is a golden age. It's not. The empire is splitting at the seams. Germanic tribes are pushing in from the north. The eastern provinces are being gobbled up by Persia. Plague returns. Civil wars become a seasonal affair. And while you're still etched in stone, the meaning of your name gets foggy. Here's a quirky little fringe fact. During this chaotic period, some emperors declare themselves Caesar within hours of being declared emperor, even if they rule for less than a week. It's like being handed a crown, a target, and a countdown clock all at once. There's one, Guy Pupienus, whose name is hilarious if you're 12, and who co-rules for only 99 days before being murdered. But even he uses Caesar in his title, because it's the rule. You have to. Enter Diocletian. He shows up at the end of the 3rd century like a strict substitute teacher walking into the classroom after years of chaos. The place is on fire, the chalkboard's been used as a shield, and the last 3 rulers are dead under the desk. Diocletian takes one look and says, "Okay, new rules." And shockingly, it works. He does what you might have appreciated. He reorganises everything. He splits the empire in 2, appointing co-emperors to govern east and west, each with a junior partner called a Caesar. The title becomes formal now, not just part of your legacy, but a built-in job description. The senior emperor is the Augustus, the junior, the Caesar. It's bureaucratic, clean, and clearly designed by someone who's tired of being stabbed in the back every few months. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate. Diocletian's reforms worked, for a while, but some argue they were the first real acknowledgement that the empire was too big to function as a single unified thing. You might have suspected it back in your day, but you never had time to do what Diocletian did, divide power before it collapses. The split between East and West will eventually harden, then calcify, and finally turn into a full-blown divorce. But in Diocletian's time, it's a bold, if temporary fix. Let's jump ahead a bit. It's the early 4th century now, and a name begins to rise through the noise. Constantine. A soldier's son, politically savvy and ambitious in the way that should probably set off alarm bells. He fights his way to the top, literally defeating rivals, taking over the western half of the empire, then the east, and finally reunifying the whole chaotic mess. You'd like this guy. Not because he's subtle, he's not, but because he understands the power of story. In 312 CE, at the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, Constantine claims he sees a vision in the sky, a cross, and the words, "In this sign, conquer." He orders his soldiers to paint Christian symbols on their shields. Then he wins. A lot. And then he does something no emperor before him dared to do. He legalizes Christianity. Not just tolerates it, endorses it, sponsors churches, converts, though suspiciously late in life. And like that, a religion that once huddled in catacombs is now decorating imperial palaces. This is a pivot point. Rome, once home to Jupiter, Mars, and all the Olympian crowd, starts to shift toward the cross. Temples are converted, pagan festivals get rebranded, and Christians begin to wield real political power. It's not overnight and it's not clean, but the cultural tide is undeniable. And through it all, your name stays. Here's the wild part. Constantine calls himself Caesar too. So do his sons. So does Britain. Much everyone after him. But now, Caesar coexists with the cross. A divine title, originally steeped in Roman religion and military conquest, is now worn by emperors who pray to a single god and sponsor bishops. And here's your fringe historical fact for this era. Constantine founds a new capital, Constantinople, a glittering eastern mirror of Rome itself. It becomes the centre of the Eastern Roman Empire, what we'll later call Byzantium. And for over 1,000 years, emperors in Constantinople will continue to call themselves Caesar. Even as the Western Roman Empire crumbles into dust, the East holds on, keeps the titles, keeps the laws, keeps your name, but the West is not okay. By the 5th century, Rome is under siege, literally. Germanic tribes, pushed by waves of migration and climate stress, start knocking on the imperial door. And the Western emperors? They're shadows, puppets. Half the time, they're too busy surviving palace intrigue to defend the city. In 476 CE, the last Western emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a tragic combo name of Rome's legendary founder and its first emperor, is deposed by a Germanic general named Odoacer. And just like that, the Western Roman Empire ends. But your name doesn't. Even as the empire dies, the dream of Rome, the idea of it, lives on in places that barely existed during your lifetime. In Germanic kingdoms, warlords call themselves Rex, king, but they yearn to be Caesar. They wear Roman tunics over chainmail, build villas with crumbling Latin inscriptions, and hire priests to write down genealogies linking them to you, no matter how far-fetched. Your name becomes a badge, a relic, a political spell. This is when the legacy really kicks into gear, because even after the collapse, even after the statues fall and the legions vanish, you still reigned, from ghost to god to idea. So now we're in the strange centuries, the ones people like to call the Dark Ages, though honestly they weren't as dark as the name suggests. Murky, sure. Chaotic, absolutely. But not without their own weird little glimmers of innovation, power plays and political cosplay. And through it all, one thing remains hilariously consistent. Your name, your title, Caesar. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE, Europe doesn't exactly collapse into barbarism. It just gets rebranded. Former Roman provinces become kingdoms, emperors become kings, and Latin becomes the language of dusty monks and snooty nobles trying to sound important. But even as Latin fades from the mouths of the common people, your name is still whispered in marble halls, scrawled in royal charters, and invoked by men who'd never survive a Roman Senate debate without breaking into tears. Let's start with the Byzantines, the Eastern Roman Empire that refuses to die. From their shiny new capital of Constantinople, these emperors still see themselves as the rightful heirs of Rome, and they act like it. They speak Greek, not Latin, wear fancy silk robes, and argue about theology more than taxes, but the title Basilius Caesar still echoes through their court. That's right. Caesar, the Greek version of Caesar, is still very much alive, stitched into titles and prayers, whispered in the corridors of palaces lit by oil lamps and heavy with incense. And here's a quirky fringe fact for you. In Byzantium, Caesar eventually becomes a sub-emperor rank, like the guy just under the emperor, often the designated heir. So you've gone from dictator to deity to corporate vice president. But hey, even that's a kind of immortality. Meanwhile, in Western Europe, a different kind of power starts stirring. Not an empire, at least not yet, but the bones of one. Tribal kings who once feared the legions now prop themselves up using old Roman imagery. They crown themselves with iron, but carve Latin inscriptions into their swords. They build stone churches using Roman blueprints. They hoard crumbling Roman law codes like relics. Why? Because Rome still means something. And Caesar, he means authority. Enter Charlemagne. It's the early 800s, and this big bearded Frankish king has managed to unite a huge chunk of Europe. He's conquered the Saxons, cowed the Lombards, and charmed the Pope. And in 800 CE, on Christmas Day, Pope Leo III pulls the ultimate power move. While Charlemagne kneels in St. Peter's Basilica, the Pope slaps a golden crown on his head and declares him Emperor of the Romans. Mic drop. Now, let's unpack that. Because there's already a Roman emperor in Constantinople. A woman, actually. Empress Irene. But the Pope doesn't recognise her rule, so instead he reboots the whole imperial franchise in the West and declares Charlemagne the new boss. Suddenly, there are two emperors of Rome, both claiming to be legitimate, both invoking your name, both pretending the other doesn't count. This kicks off centuries of awkwardness. The emperors in Constantinople are furious. To them, Charlemagne is just a well-dressed barbarian with a fancy helmet. But Charlemagne doesn't care. He immediately starts acting like an emperor, building roads, reforming laws, issuing coins with his face on one side and Christian symbols on the other. He even digs up old Roman administrative systems, dusts them off, and tries to revive them. And yes, he's called Caesar in diplomatic letters, because how else do you tell the world you're legitimate? You link yourself to the OG. This new empire becomes the Holy Roman Empire, and here's where things get truly bizarre. For the next 1,000 years, various European kings will be crowned Holy Roman Emperor by the Pope or by political wrangling, depending on how the Church is feeling that decade. The title Caesar, or Kaiser in the German tongue, becomes embedded in the very identity of these rulers. And here's the historical fact you'll love. In the Holy Roman Empire, emperors will sometimes be referred to as Kaiser Karl, Kaiser Friedrich, and so on. It's a direct linguistic descendant of your name, and these guys take it seriously. They style themselves as defenders of Christendom, inheritors of Roman law, and avatars of imperial glory. Most of them never even set foot in Rome, but they cling to the illusion of Romanness like a toddler to a blanket. Meanwhile, back in Constantinople, the Eastern Roman Empire is still kicking. Through plagues, wars, and theological tantrums it survives, leaner, meaner, and more Byzantine by the year. The emperors there still carry the title of Caesar, often as a secondary honorific beneath the main title of Basilius. And in times of dynastic crisis, that title becomes a bargaining chip, a way to elevate a son, a brother, or a particularly loyal general. Caesar becomes both a memory and a marketing tool, but of course, nothing lasts forever. In 1453, the unthinkable happens. Constantinople falls. The Ottoman Turks, led by Mehmed II, breach the city's walls and end the 1,000-year reign of the Eastern Roman Empire. But guess what Mehmed calls himself after taking the city? Caesar of Rome. No, seriously. Mehmed claims the Roman mantle, not just as a conqueror, but as an heir. He considers his victory not just a military triumph, but a historical succession. And in some surreal twist of cultural symmetry, a Muslim sultan now bears your title. That's how far your shadow stretches, from the Republic to Byzantium to the Ottomans. It's a title that never dies. And let's not forget Russia. Over in the frosty east, a different empire is brewing. The Russian Tsars, starting with Ivan III, then full-blown with Ivan IV, aka Ivan the Terrible, begin calling themselves Tsar, the Slavic version of Caesar. They marry into Byzantine imperial bloodlines. They adopt Orthodox Christianity from the east, and they claim Moscow as the third Rome. The first was Rome itself, the second Constantinople. Now it's Russia's turn. That's right. 1,000 years after your assassination, Your name is reborn in a snow-covered palace with onion domes and fur-lined thrones, and for centuries Tsars will rule with the same borrowed majesty, the same mythic weight. Your name, by now, has circled the globe in different tongues, riding on different banners, spoken by men who never heard your voice, never saw the Rubicon, but still believe in what your name represents. Power, glory, authority sanctioned by history itself. By this point you've transcended flesh. You're not a man anymore. You're a symbol, a linguistic fossil embedded deep in the DNA of empires. Long after your bones turn to dust beneath the Roman Forum, your name is being used to crown emperors, justify wars, and design uniforms. Caesar has become one of the rare words that doesn't just survive history, it steers it. Let's rewind for a second and take stock of how absurd this all is. You were born into a fading republic, clawed your way up the greasy marble slope of Roman politics, dodged pirates, crossed the Rubicon, conquered Gaul, flirted with monarchy, and then got turned into a pincushion by a senate full of guys you had over for dinner last month. That should have been the end of your story. A rise and fall, classic and tragic. Instead, you became the blueprint. By the early modern period, your name is more than just imperial shorthand, it's political armour. Monarchs in Europe are obsessed with legitimacy, and Caesar is the gold standard. That's why the Holy Roman Emperors still call themselves Kaiser. It's why the Russians cling to Tsar, and it's why even upstart kingdoms with zero Roman bloodlines start looking for ways to borrow your glow. Enter the age of absolutism. We're talking about the 1600s and 1700s now. Kings and queens across Europe are puffing themselves up like peacocks, declaring that their right to rule comes directly from God, the old divine right chestnut. But behind the glittering crowns and divine decrees is something far older, your shadow. Monarchs style themselves like emperors, build cities with forums and columns, commission sculptures that mimic Roman statuary. Versailles, a fever dream of Roman imperial architecture. Even Louis XIV, the Sun King himself, keeps busts of you in his palace. He wants to be like you, minus the stabbing ideally. Here's a juicy little fringe detail. Napoleon Bonaparte, during his rise, reads your commentaries religiously. He's obsessed with your campaigns in Gaul, your tactics, your political instincts. He keeps a copy of Commentari de Bello Gallico by his bedside like it's a bedtime story. And when he crowns himself emperor in 1804, literally taking the crown from the Pope's hands and putting it on his own head, you can bet your marble toga that he's channeling you. He doesn't call himself Caesar outright, but the inspiration is clear. He reorganizes France into departments like provinces, builds a centralized bureaucracy, and leads a cult of personality that might make even you raise an eyebrow. He's not just ruling, he's myth-making. And after his empire collapses, the world doesn't forget him, just like it never forgot you. Meanwhile, your name is still echoing in quieter places. In Germany, the Kaiser is back in fashion. The title becomes central to a unifying German identity in the 19th century, especially under Wilhelm I, who's declared German Emperor in the Hall of Mirrors at Versailles in 1871. The symbolism is thick, Roman echoes bouncing off French chandeliers. The Germans aren't just making a new empire, they're reaching back through history to grab your authority. And in Russia, the Tsars are still at it. Nicholas III, Alexander II, Nicholas II, each Tsar rules with the same weighty conviction that their power is eternal, rooted in divine will and historic inevitability. You'd recognise the arrogance, the pageantry, the stubborn resistance to reform. You might also recognise the fear, the feeling that the entire empire is built on a cracked foundation, and any day the people might grab pitchforks and rewrite history, and then they do. In 1917, the Russian Revolution explodes. Tsar Nicholas II is forced to abdicate, and not long after, he and his entire family are executed in a dingy basement. It's brutal, cold, and symbolic. The Tsar, your last living namesake, dies not as a divine ruler, but as a prisoner in his own country. A 1,000-year line traced all the way back to Constantinople and through Byzantine emperors who wore Caesar as a title ends with gunshots and silence. In Germany, it's not much better. World War I guts the old imperial order. The German Kaiser, Wilhelm II, abdicates in 1918 and flees to exile. No more eagles, no more Caesar of the Germans, just shattered empires and a continent wondering what comes next. Which brings us to a very uncomfortable pivot. Because even after Caesar, Kaiser, and Tsar vanish as official titles, your name refuses to die. In the 20th century, it gets repurposed in ways you'd probably find horrifying. It's no longer a title of nobility or glory. It becomes a symbol used by tyrants and demagogues who want to drape themselves in ancient authority. In Italy, a journalist turned dictator named Benito Mussolini starts rambling about reviving the Roman Empire. He wants to be the new Caesar, marches in parades, delivers bombastic speeches from balconies, and dreams of Italian legions once more crossing into Africa and Greece. He even refers to himself as Il Duce, the leader. But it's clear which leader he's channeling. He's trying to resurrect the optics of your reign, without understanding the nuance, the charm, the actual strategy. Spoiler, it doesn't go well. In Germany, things get darker. A failed artist with a moustache you definitely wouldn't have trusted rises to power and builds a regime that openly models its imagery, rituals, and structure on Rome. Nazi propaganda is full of Roman aesthetics. Eagles, standards, marches, architecture designed to feel eternal. The Third Reich, that's what they called it. The first being the Holy Roman Empire, the second being the German Empire, and the third, well, you get the idea. Your name doesn't appear on their flags, but it's in their ambition, in their obsession with power as performance, in their attempt to shape the future by invoking the past. And here's a brutal irony. You, who once wrote that mercy was a greater strength than vengeance, who spared enemies, forgave rivals, and handed out citizenship like candy, are now being echoed by men who stand for the exact opposite. The emperors who came after you twisted your image. The tyrants of the modern age just broke it apart and used the fragments. So, what does it mean? It means legacy is a slippery thing. You can shape it, but you can't control it. Once you die, spectacularly, under the statue of a man you defeated, your story becomes public property. And the world starts telling it however it wants. You're remembered as a hero, a villain, a genius, a tyrant. Every generation polishes a different part of the statue. And your name has floated from lips in Greek, Latin, German, Arabic, Russian, and beyond. Sometimes whispered in awe, sometimes shouted in rebellion, sometimes spat out in disgust, but never forgotten. And now, here we are, standing in the long, flickering shadow of the 21st century. The marble has crumbled, the eagles have fallen, the bronze busts have either oxidized into museum pieces or been melted down in revolutions. But somehow, impossibly, you're still here. Not physically, of course. No one's found your actual remains. Your ashes likely scattered or lost during Rome's long decline. But your presence? That's everywhere. Look around. Your name still shows up in textbooks, video games, pop culture, internet memes, and late-night political rants. You've been a Shakespearean tragedy, a Netflix documentary, a Halloween costume, and a Twitter joke about salad. You're the most famous assassination in history, the blueprint for political ambition, and the ultimate warning sign for what happens when power gets too personal. But let's peel that back. Underneath the jokes and statues, what actually made you so enduring? Maybe it's that you were a contradiction in motion. You were ruthless but forgiving, arrogant but incredibly smart, violent but visionary. You built alliances while planning betrayals. You could rouse a crowd with a few choice words and then turn around and spend hours refining a legal reform no one else even understood. You were Rome, in all its messy, brutal, brilliant glory, reaching forward into empire while still pretending to be a republic. That contradiction made you fascinating, and fascination is the fuel of legacy. People study you not because you were perfect, but because you were complicated. And complications stick. Here's a modern historical fact that proves your reach. Your name, Julius Caesar, is one of the most recognized in human history. Poll after poll shows that even people who flunked history classes still know who you were. They may not remember the details, Gallic campaigns, political reforms, marriage alliances, but they remember the vibe. The laurel crown, the dagger, the betrayal, the drama. And that's the key. Your story was good. Really good. It had all the beats. A scrappy underdog with noble lineage and no money, A meteoric rise through clever alliances and military brilliance, a shocking romance with a foreign queen, a charismatic domination of a failing system, a flashy theatrical fall, a betrayal so iconic it became a proverb, and then, in the ultimate plot twist, you win anyway, because the world keeps using your name for kings. But let's not forget the deeper layers. There are classrooms today, right now, where your writings are still assigned. Your commentaries on the Gallic War are studied not just as history, but as literature. You weren't just a general. You were a narrator of conquest, spinning your brutal campaigns into a smooth, detached narrative. The Belgi are the bravest, you wrote, sounding like a science teacher while describing the slow annihilation of a people. That voice, chilly, methodical, assured, still echoes in lecture halls. It's taught as an example of persuasive writing, rhetoric with teeth, a masterclass in turning violence into virtue, and that legacy of language goes beyond classrooms. Political theorists still wrestle with your reforms. You centralized the grain supply, expanded the Senate, cracked down on corruption with mixed results, and gave land to veterans. You tried to standardize the calendar, and guess what? It worked. The Julian calendar, with a few later tweaks, is still the skeleton of time for most of the modern world. Your idea of a 365-day year, with a leap day every 4 years, has lasted longer than most religions. Think about that. You're not just in the history books, you're in time itself. And then there's the calendar's infamous date, March 15th, the Ides of March. It was just a day once. Now it's a warning, a punchline, a meme. Beware the Ides of March, they say, whenever politics gets spicy or a celebrity steps on the wrong landmine of public opinion. It's become cultural shorthand for watch your back, all because of you. Here's a fringe fact that leans toward the surreal. In the US state of Texas, there's a local chapter of a community theatre troupe that performs the assassination of Caesar every March 15th in a public park. Complete with togas, fake daggers, and dramatic yells of "Et tu, Brute!" People bring picnic blankets, kids get popcorn, a political murder turned into live entertainment. Somehow you've become seasonal programming, and yet, while some remember you as the tragic victim of betrayal, others still see you as the betrayer, not of friends, but of democracy. There's always a camp that sees your rise not as a triumph of reform, but the death knell of freedom. You're the man who choked the voice of the people, who turned Rome's complex and messy machinery into a one-man show. You're the cautionary tale behind every dictator who promises order and delivers silence. This debate has kept scholars up at night for generations. Was the Republic already doomed before you ever picked up a sword? Were you just the sharpest man in a broken room, doing what had to be done? Or did you kill the Republic for your own glory, cloaked in a PR campaign of reform? And now, the modern world faces similar questions. Democracies wobble, populist leaders rise, systems strain under the weight of speed, misinformation, economic anxiety and factionalism. And guess who? People start bringing up when things get tense. You. News anchors use you as shorthand for political overreach. Historians warn that another Caesar might be around the corner. Political cartoons still draw you, bleeding on the Senate floor, or sitting smugly on a throne while the world burns around you. You've become the go-to reference for every time someone asks, can one person save a broken system, or will they just break it further? You don't get a say in how you're used anymore. You're a tool, a cautionary tale, a hero, a villain, a meme with a marble jawline. Your face has been painted, printed, digitalized, and turned into a talking bobblehead. But behind all that, behind the busts and the books and the Broadway versions of your life, you were a man. A clever, flawed, brilliant man who dared to grab too much and still, somehow, made history fall in love with you for it. Not because you were right, not because you were fair, but because you were undeniably interesting. And if there's one thing history never forgets, it's the people who made things interesting. You didn't just walk into Rome, you rewrote it. Now let's do something fun. Let's rewind time all the way back to your last morning. The Ides of March, 44 BCE. You wake up in your home on the Via Sacra, sunlight slipping through the woven curtains. A little too bright for the headache you're probably nursing after last night's feast. Calpurnia's already on edge. She's had bad dreams again. Something about the ceiling collapsing and your statue pouring blood. Classic Roman nightmare stuff. You scoff, but you're also not exactly rushing to get dressed either. You're supposed to go to the Senate today, to the Curia of Pompey of all places, your old enemy's theatre now used for political meetings while the Senate House undergoes renovations. It's a weird choice. You know the optics are bad, but you go anyway, because when you're Caesar, who tells you what to do? You're at the absolute height of your power. You're dictator for life, even if you're still pretending that means something temporary. The Senate has given you honours previously reserved for gods. Your face is on coins. Statues of you are being set up beside ancient kings. There's even talk, whispers, but loud ones, that someone might offer you the crown again, this time for real. You've rejected it before, theatrically in front of the crowd, but you've also made sure they knew it was offered. There's a fine line between humility and performance, and let's be honest, you perform everything. The city around you is buzzing. Some support you wholeheartedly. The poor adore you, after all you gave them land, food, spectacle. The soldiers, they'd still die for you. But others, the Senate's old guard, the optimates, the self-righteous defenders of a republic that hasn't worked in generations, they're simmering, boiling really, and they've had enough. Now here's the scholarly debate. Did you know the plot was coming? Some say yes, that you had warnings, omens, dreams, even anonymous notes handed to you as you walk through the forum. One man, Artemidorus, reportedly tried to give you a scroll with the entire list of conspirators' names, but you never read it. Or maybe you did. Maybe you just thought you were untouchable. You've escaped death so many times. Sulla, pirates, civil wars. You probably felt immortal by now. Or maybe, deep down, you knew you were walking into a trap and just didn't care. You leave your house late, already shrugging off Calpurnia's pleas to stay home. On your way, you pass a soothsayer. He catches your eye, the same man who warned you to beware the Ides of March. You smirk and say, the Ides have come, like you've just beaten fate in a game of dice. He replies softly, aye, Caesar, but not gone. And you keep walking. You enter the Curia, cloaked in your flowing purple-trimmed toga, surrounded by men who smile too widely and pat your shoulder just a little too hard. There's a flurry of movement, papers being shuffled, greetings exchanged. You sit. And then it happens. They close in. Tullius Cimber grabs your toga. Casca stabs first, fumbling, nervous. Then the others join, dozens of them. Sharp metal flashing in the pale light, bouncing off marble. You don't cry out. You don't plead. You fight for a moment, stabbed in the shoulder, the ribs, the side. Then you see Brutus, and something in you breaks. You pull your toga over your face, not because you fear death, but because you don't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing it in your eyes. When it's over, you lie at the foot of the statue of Pompey, blood-staining marble, 40 or so men now standing in silence, suddenly unsure of what comes next. You're dead. But your story is only halfway told. Let's jump forward, back to now. Modern-day Rome. Tourists walk through the ruins of the Forum every day, clutching water bottles, wearing sun hats and sneakers. They take photos of the Temple of Caesar, a modest ruin with a little stone altar where flowers are still placed. Yes, even now, fresh ones. People still leave tributes on the anniversary of your death. Roses, notes, coins. Someone once left a tiny plastic figurine of you holding a coffee cup. History apparently has a sense of humour, and here's a delightful fringe detail. At Lago di Torre Argentina, where the Curia of Pompey once stood, there's now a cat sanctuary. The ruins are fenced off, filled with sleepy stray cats sunbathing where senators once plotted murder. The exact spot of your assassination is open to the sky, and felines now stretch lazily across the same stones that once soaked up your blood. The contrast is beautiful. Violent past, soft present. You, the symbol of ambition and betrayal, now memorialised in a quiet courtyard full of purring animals. Elsewhere in the world, your name is everywhere. On restaurants, high schools, pizza chains, action figures. There's a Julius Caesar shampoo, a Caesar's Palace casino, and of course, the Caesar salad, which, ironically, has absolutely nothing to do with you. It was invented in Mexico by an Italian-American restaurateur in the 1920s, but still, your name got glued to it, and now people think you invented anchovy dressing. Even in space, your legacy hangs in the void. There's a crater on the moon named after you, a permanent scar on the surface of a dead world, named for the man who thought he could defy death. But of all the legacies, all the adaptations and reinventions, none sticks quite like your role in language. To cross the Rubicon means making a bold, irreversible decision. Beware the ideas of March means watch your back. Et tu, Brute means betrayal of the worst kind. You've become metaphors. You didn't just influence law, politics, military strategy, or calendars. You infected culture. Every few years, some politician somewhere is compared to you. Not because they're conquering Gaul, but because they've accumulated power just a little too comfortably. Your name is an alarm bell, a case study, a rallying cry, a warning. And the scholars? They're still fighting over you. Some love you, some loathe you. Some try to measure your achievements in stats. Battles won, laws passed. Others argue over ethics, over what could have been. Were you the saviour of Rome or its executioner? A man of the people or a man of the elite? Did you die too soon or not soon enough? No one agrees, but everyone has an opinion. Because your story refuses to stay still. It shifts shape, like a coin catching light. Hero on one side, tyrant on the other. What they don't tell you about immortality is that it's exhausting. You're not resting. You're spinning in every classroom debate, every political editorial, every sword and sandal movie where someone in sandals raises their chin and says your name like it means something primal. You're still here. You're still Caesar, and no one can quite decide what to do with that. Now let's zoom way out, far beyond marble statues and faded Latin inscriptions, beyond even the crumbling temples and imperial coins stamped with your aquiline nose. Let's look at what you really did. The thing no dagger could undo. You didn't just conquer Gaul or cross the Rubicon or rewrite a calendar. You changed how power itself looks, how it moves, how it behaves. You took this messy, sputtering old machine called the Roman Republic, and whether you meant to or not, you turned it into the world's first real blueprint for autocracy in disguise. And here's the kicker. Most modern governments, in one way or another, are still reacting to you. Let's start with the obvious. America. The United States was built specifically to avoid what you represented. The Founding Fathers were obsessed with Rome. Read their letters and you'll see them name-dropping. Cato, Cicero, Brutus, you know, the guys who stuck knives in your ribs. They studied the fall of the Roman Republic like it was a horror story written just for them. George Washington was practically begged to be a king. He refused. Twice. Why? Because they were terrified of another Caesar. You were the ghost in the room while the Constitution was being written. But even while they feared your memory, they borrowed your ideas. The Senate? Straight out of Rome. The idea of a republic. Roman. The eagle as a symbol of strength. Roman again. Heck, even their buildings look like yours. Columns, domes, marble facades, all designed to whisper power the same way Rome did. They hated tyranny, but they still wanted grandeur, and no one did grandeur quite like you. Here's a historical fact that makes this even better. One of the earliest American plays ever performed was Brutus, or The Fall of Tarquin, a tragedy about the founding of the Roman Republic. It premiered in Philadelphia in 1790, less than 2 years after the US Constitution was ratified. The audience? Senators, diplomats, judges. All watching actors reenact a story about murdering a king to save the Republic. Subtle, right? But even outside the US, your political ghost roams freely. Think about how many leaders over the centuries have started out as men of the people, only to gradually become the sole voice in the room. It's not always a coup. Sometimes it's just the slow accumulation of executive power, padded with popularity and wrapped in the rhetoric of necessity. I didn't want this power, they say, but the people demanded it. Sound familiar? And when they cross their own version of the Rubicon, whether metaphorically or literally, they always find a way to justify it. For stability. For the nation. Because the system was broken. You could stitch together a global anthology of Caesar moments. Some wear military uniforms, some wear suits. But the story is always the same. One man standing above the wreckage of a dysfunctional government, offering order in exchange for obedience. And then there's the cultural Caesar, the media icon you've become. You've been played on screen by everyone from Rex Harrison to Kieran Hines to John Gavin. You've shown up in Shakespearean tragedies, animated series, political satires, and at least 2 video games where the plot is just conquer stuff until you run out of map. You're a boss fight, a collectible card, a TikTok audio, and yes, even now, in the algorithm-choked trenches of the internet, you occasionally go viral. Here's a fringe detail for the digital age. On Reddit, there's an entire thread dedicated to discussing whether you would have made a good CEO of a tech startup. Spoiler, the answers range from yes, he'd disrupt everything, to absolutely not, he'd yell at investors and get stabbed during a board meeting. But the fact that this conversation even exists, that says everything. You're not a relic, you're a template. People can't stop comparing their current world to the one you helped reshape, and the debate never ends. For every academic defending your political reforms, redistribution of land, debt forgiveness, expansion of citizenship, there's another warning about the danger of personal rule. For every textbook praising your military genius, there's a voice asking, but at what cost? The conquest of Gaul, for example, it wasn't just brilliant strategy, it was also a catastrophic bloodbath. Hundreds of thousands killed or enslaved. And why? For Rome? Or for your own glory? That's the moral wrinkle that refuses to smooth out. You weren't a villain, but you weren't a saint either. You were something harder to define, necessary and dangerous. You gave Rome what it needed, but not what it wanted. You were too ambitious, too bold, too efficient for a system built on delays and deadlock. You didn't break the Republic. You just moved faster than it could handle, and when the system couldn't keep up, it did what systems always do. It lashed out. But it was already too late. Because here's the real twist. The thing no one in that Senate chamber realized until your blood hit the floor. You won. You died. Yes. But everything you set in motion, the consolidation of power, the shift from republic to empire, the elevation of personal leadership over collective chaos, it all became Rome's new normal, and from there, the world's. The very people who stabbed you hoping to save the Republic ended up ushering in something even more absolute. Augustus didn't just continue your work, he perfected it. He cleaned up your rough edges, played humble, and turned imperial rule into an art form. You cracked the mold, he refined it. But without your explosion, there would have been nothing to shape. Here's another historical detail that sticks. After your death, statues of you were destroyed by the conspirators, but soon after, they were rebuilt, bigger, shinier, more dramatic. They tried to erase you, and the people just made you larger. And still, we can't let you go. We name things after you, debate you, put you in classrooms and sitcoms. We admire you, fear you, warn each other about becoming you. There's something poetic in that. How your legacy is now a moral mirror, a kind of test we hold up to ourselves. Would we follow a man like Caesar? Would we oppose him? Would we become him? And if we did, would we even realize it? Let's take one more slow step back, not just from history, but from the entire concept of power, and look at what you left behind in the most human way possible. Strip away the titles, the statues, the temples, and the blood-slicked blades. Forget the emperors who came after, the generals who copied your tactics, the speeches twisted by playwrights and politicians. Let's talk about what it felt like to be you, a man standing at the edge of the world's most complicated civilization, trying to shape it like wet clay with his bare hands. Because if we're being honest, that's all you were. Just a man. A brilliant, ambitious, deeply flawed man who never stopped pushing. You weren't born with a crown, you weren't handed a throne, you weren't even rich, not at first. You came from a noble family, sure, but one that had more prestige than coin. You had to fight for every inch, through scandal, exile, political backstabbing, and actual literal stabbing. And what drove you? Was it ego? Probably. Was it patriotism? Maybe. Was it fear? Almost certainly. That gnawing sense that if you stopped moving for even a second, the world would swallow you whole. That Rome itself would collapse under the weight of its own corruption unless someone, you, seized the reins and yanked the beast back into line. There's something painfully relatable in that. The feeling of being surrounded by incompetence, watching a system fail and thinking, if I don't fix this, no one will. That's not villainy, that's not heroism, that's just the trap of being the only one willing to take responsibility in a room full of people looking for someone else to blame. But here's the twist that makes it tragic. In fixing things, you broke them. Or maybe they were already broken, and you just smashed the illusion that they weren't. And your death. Let's not forget that your death wasn't just political, it was personal. Those men didn't kill an emperor, they killed a friend, a mentor, a man they dined with, laughed with, conspired with. It wasn't just a coup, it was an emotional execution. They wanted to destroy not just your power, but your very presence. Because they couldn't argue with you, couldn't outmaneuver you, couldn't match your charm or your military brilliance or your sheer momentum, so they resorted to knives. And that's maybe the most revealing part of your legacy. That for all your laws and legions, your downfall was rooted in something so human. Fear, resentment, jealousy. The same fragile emotions that topple friendships, families and empires alike. But in the end, it didn't work. They thought they were saving the Republic. Instead, they lit the fuse that burned it down. Here's a strange, beautiful little historical detail. Decades after your death in the early days of the Roman Empire, some senators still mark the Ides of March with quiet ceremonies. Not public ones, they knew better than to stir up trouble, but private whispered observances, a toast, a poem, a dagger laid gently on a family altar. And the words they spoke weren't always in praise or in mourning. Sometimes they were just questions. Was it worth it? No one had a clear answer. Because your legacy sits exactly on that razor's edge. You were both the man who wanted to reform Rome and the man who brought it to heel. The liberator and the destroyer. The voice of the people and the silencer of the Senate. Every person who studies you finds a different Caesar, depending on what they're looking for. The tragic hero, the aspiring tyrant, the political genius, the cautionary tale. That's why you last, because you were never just one thing. You were the sum of contradictions, stoic and theatrical, calculated and impulsive, ruthless and strangely generous. You cried at funerals, you cracked jokes with pirates, you slaughtered tribes in the name of civilization, and then wrote about it like it was a travel journal. You punished your enemies, but spared more than you needed to. You could talk your way out of almost anything, but you never talked your way out of that room, with the knives and the senators and Brutus. And here's where the real mythology sets in. You see, every culture needs its hinge point, the moment when the world changes, when the old order dies and the new one begins. In Rome, you were that hinge. After you, nothing was the same. Power shifted from law to persona, from institutions to image. The Republic tried to make a comeback, but the people had tasted something easier. A singular figure to lead, command, and most importantly decide. They didn't want to vote for 10 bickering tribunes anymore. They wanted another Caesar, and they kept wanting one, for 2,000 years. From emperors to presidents to CEOs in corner offices, we've never really stopped being fascinated by the lone figure who claims they can fix it all. And every time someone rises up with that quiet confidence and sharp smile, someone somewhere starts quoting you, sometimes without even realizing it. They say things like, "The die is cast," or "I came, I saw, I conquered," or "Et tu, brute." Lines polished by centuries of repetition, disconnected from their context but not their meaning. People don't quote you because they read Latin. They quote you because your words still carry that weight, that unmistakable chill of history repeating itself. You're not just remembered, you're replayed. Every uprising, every coup, every time someone redraws borders or rewrites constitutions or declares that they alone can save the state, there you are lurking in the footnotes, daring us to remember what happened last time. And that's the strange, cruel gift you gave us. The blueprint of power and the warning sign, a manual and a red flag bound together in marble and myth. We still haven't figured out which one to listen to. There's something haunting about how your name echoes not just in books and battlefields, but in the places we don't always expect. In the quiet corners of conversation, the pauses between political promises, the nervous laughter of a leader who knows he's pushing just a little too far. You're there, watching, looming, like a shadow stretching across centuries. And not because people remember every campaign or every reform, or the specific number of times you were declared consul. No. What? Sticks is the feeling, the idea, that when the system breaks down, someone like you always steps up and says, "I'll take it from here." Even now, in boardrooms and parliaments and palaces, people who couldn't tell you the difference between the Rubicon and the Tiber still invoke your story, knowingly or not. The leader who rises too fast, the trusted friend who becomes a threat, the moment when a republic becomes something else. It's not even about Rome anymore. It's about the pattern, and you're the archetype. Let's pause on that word, archetype, because that's where your legacy really lives now. You're not a man anymore. You're a shape, a symbol, a role that keeps getting recast with different actors, new costumes, new stakes. There's always a Caesar in the wings, waiting. Someone who talks softly, moves confidently, smiles with their mouth but not their eyes. Someone who understands that power isn't something you seize once. It's something you maintain by convincing everyone else that it's normal for you to have it. Here's a fringe fact to chew on while you brush the dust off your laurel wreath. In some psychological circles, they've actually started using the phrase Caesar complex to describe people, often leaders, who believe they're the only one capable of saving a broken institution. It's not an official diagnosis, but it's used seriously. It captures that cocktail of brilliance and arrogance, that obsessive need to fix the machine by taking control of it entirely. Sound familiar? You're basically a personality type now. And it's not always a compliment. But the strange part is how drawn we are to it. There's a deep human craving for order, especially in chaos. And when that chaos drags on too long, when laws start to feel useless and debates endless and the future blurry, we look for someone who promises certainty, not kindness, not wisdom, just clarity. And you, Caesar, offered clarity in an age of confusion. That's the most seductive kind of power, not just strength, but direction. That's why you still show up in literature, in philosophy, and political science lectures and angry dinner table rants. It's why leaders still study you, not always openly, but carefully. Because your life is a manual for how to hold power, and your death is a parable about what happens when you hold it too tightly. But the world has changed since you last walked the cobblestones of the Forum. We've built democracies, torn down monarchies, fought world wars, launched satellites. We've digitized economies, redefined borders, dismantled empires that once made yours look small. And yet, for all our modernity, we still grapple with the same question. What do we do when the system fails? Do we patch it up? Or do we find another Caesar? And when that Caesar appears, inevitably, unavoidably, do we cheer? Or do we sharpen our knives? That's the dilemma that hangs over every generation. Because once you've lived through Caesar, once you've seen how seductive that kind of authority can be, you never forget. Your story becomes a cultural reflex, a warning baked into the architecture of every major political system since. Even the term Caesarean section, yes, the medical procedure, is thought by many to have originated with you. The truth is messier. You were likely born the normal way, despite the legends. But still, the word Caesarean lingers, attached to something brutal and life-altering, as if even birth itself can't escape your gravity. Your name is part of the scaffolding now, and maybe it always will be. Because here's the thing, you didn't just influence history, you injected yourself into its bloodstream. There's a reason no one ever says, "Be careful or you'll become a Marius," or "Watch out, that guy's turning into a Sulla." No offence to them, but you're the one who stuck. You're the one we remember, not just for what you did, but for how you made it look. With drama, with style, with tragedy. People love a good fool, especially when the fool feels like destiny. Let's talk about Shakespeare for a moment, because his Julius Caesar, first staged in 1599, isn't really about you at all. Not entirely. It's about Brutus, about fear, loyalty, friendship, betrayal. About killing one man to save an idea, and then watching that idea collapse anyway. It's poetic that in the most famous telling of your death you don't even make it to the halfway point. You exit in Act 3, bleeding and betrayed. The rest of the play is about the aftershock, because that's what you became, an aftershock that never quite stopped rumbling. In classrooms across the world, students still read that scene, the moment where the knives come out, the line that always lands like a dagger to the spine. Et tu, brute, and the class goes quiet. Even if they don't know Latin, even if they've never opened a history book, they understand that moment. The betrayal that isn't just political, it's personal. That's what makes it eternal. Your death resonates not because it was a power shift, but because it was a human moment, filled with pain, confusion, and heartbreak. That's the part people feel in their gut. That's why you endure. You weren't just an emperor. You were a friend, a rival, a mentor, a mistake. And that's why we can't let you go. So where does that leave us? Living in a world built partly in your image, still fascinated by the man who changed everything and paid the price for it. Still learning your story, rewriting it, quoting it, performing it, arguing over it. Still watching history try and fail to outrun the shape you left behind. You were supposed to die that day, and yet, somehow, you didn't. So let's take a breath and let the weight of it settle. The fact that despite all the centuries, all the empires, all the shifts in power and language and geography, you've become less of a man and more of a recurring question. Not who was Caesar, but what is Caesar? And even more dangerously, do we still need one? The world has gotten louder since your time. Bigger, faster, messier in some ways. We have satellites now, Caesar. Metal gods orbiting our planet, watching every move. Nations span continents. Democracies span billions of people. Governments are more complex than anything you ever could have imagined, and yet somehow, they still break in the same ways. Corruption, greed, gridlock, fear. And every time the gears start to jam, that same old whisper returns. Maybe one person could fix it. We've dressed it up in new language, of course. We say strong leader. We say decisive voice. We say anti-establishment. But it's all the same gravitational pull. A society spirals, people panic, and someone stands up and says what you once said. Let me show you how it's done. And just like that, we're back on the Ides of March. It doesn't always end with daggers anymore. Sometimes it ends in elections, sometimes in applause, sometimes in quiet, gradual shifts that feel like nothing, until suddenly everything is different and no one remembers when it changed. That's the thing about Caesarism. It's not always a coup. It can be a shrug, a sigh, a tired acceptance. It sneaks in, and people welcome it. Because what you offered wasn't just power, it was relief. Relief from the mess. From the chaos of the Senate, from the bickering of factions, from the slog of compromise. You cut through it all, like a sword. Clean, sharp, final. But that finality comes at a cost, doesn't it? And yet we keep flirting with it. Still, today's leaders, the ones who really understand the game, study you even if they don't say it out loud. They mimic your tone, your posture, your strategic patience. Some of them even quote you, tucked slyly into speeches for those who know what to listen for. They know that part of your genius wasn't just what you did, it was how you framed it. You didn't just rule, you narrated. You told your own story before anyone else could, and that made you not just a general or a politician, but a character. And characters, they live forever. Here's a little-known fringe detail that illustrates this perfectly. In the early 20th century in Mussolini's Italy, children were taught Latin not as a classical language, but as the language of power. And whose Latin? Yours. They read your campaigns, your declarations, your victories. Mussolini wanted them to speak like Caesar, think like Caesar, march like Caesar. He called it heritage. But what he really meant was branding. That's what you've become, the ultimate brand. No one markets ambition like you. Even your failure was triumphant. You died in the middle of your arc, still rising, still reshaping the world. You didn't fade, you exploded, and every ambitious soul since has tried to recreate that impact. And here's the irony buried under the rubble of history. You never declared yourself emperor. That was your heir's move. You were still operating within the structures of the Republic, technically, redefining them, stretching them like wet leather, but not breaking them. Not officially. You stayed just barely on the right side of tradition. You were dictator, yes, but not king. You let other people call you divine. You let the Senate vote you honours. You just made it impossible to say no. That balancing act, that genius for moving just fast enough but never too fast, is something very few since you have ever pulled off. Most crash, most overreach. But you? You tiptoed along the edge of the cliff with a grin and made everyone below cheer. Until the day you fell. But here's a curious thought. What if you knew it would end that way? There are theories, whispered in academic circles and tucked into the footnotes of dusty dissertations, that you wanted the martyrdom. that by stepping into the Curia that day, you weren't just accepting death, you were setting up your legacy. Because if you died then, in that room, at the hands of the old elite, you'd become untouchable. You'd never have to become the tyrant they feared. You'd never grow old, never face revolt, never be forced to make the compromises that muddy every ruler. You'd freeze forever at your peak. And isn't that what happened? You didn't die as a villain. You died as a question mark, as potential interrupted, as the man who could have been anything if they'd just let you. But the danger in that narrative is obvious, because it's addictive. For centuries, leaders have looked at your arc and thought, I'll do it better. They imagine themselves as Caesar, bold, brilliant, justified, but never imagine themselves bleeding on the Senate floor. That part gets conveniently edited out. That's the problem with legends. They inspire, yes, but they also blind. And so we find ourselves in a world where Caesar still walks among us, not in flesh, but in form, in the way power is centralized, in the way populism flirts with personal rule, in the way nations rally behind a single name, a single voice, a single promise that things will be simple again if we just follow. And we keep asking, is that bad? Maybe, maybe not. Because while your story is a warning, it's also an acknowledgement of something raw and true. Humans want leadership. We crave certainty. We're not always good at shared decision-making, at compromise, at systems. Sometimes we want someone who just handles it. And that's what makes your legacy so complicated. You weren't just the man who broke the system. You were the man who revealed its fragility. And once that's seen, it can't be unseen. We look around and wonder, is our system strong enough to survive another Caesar? Or is it already too late? Are we already clapping for him, smiling at the balcony, waiting for him to speak? So now we shift to the other half of the story, the half that gets less attention, but deserves just as much focus, because for every Caesar there has to be a Brutus, and for every act of rising power there's a desperate attempt to stop it. What happened after your assassination wasn't the triumph of democracy. It wasn't the return of the Republic. It was a slow-motion political implosion, a kind of historical vacuum that sucked in everyone who thought they could control what came next. And at the centre of that collapse, the men who killed you, Brutus and Cassius. Now let's be real. Brutus isn't exactly a hero. He's complex. He's torn. He's maybe a little too proud of his ancestry, tracing his bloodline back to the Brutus who helped kick out the last Roman king centuries before. He believes he's saving Rome, sure, but he also believes he alone understands what Rome needs. Sound familiar? Cassius, on the other hand, is all sharp edges, less idealism, more calculation. He's the one who gets people moving, who plans the logistics, who rounds up the co-conspirators and whispers at the dinner parties. If Brutus is the moral face of the plot, Cassius is the engine. But both men share one fatal flaw. They assume that killing you would fix everything. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. Within hours of your death, the so-called liberators realize they've made a terrible miscalculation. The Roman people don't rise up and cheer. There's no chorus of voices thanking them for saving the Republic. Instead, there's silence, unease, and then, very quickly, anger. Because while the Senate might have feared you, the people, they loved you. You gave them grain, land, gladiator games, debt forgiveness. You made them feel like they mattered, and in return, they followed you, not out of fear, but out of loyalty. So when you died, it didn't feel like the restoration of the liberty. It felt like murder. Now comes the counterpunch. Enter Mark Antony. You knew he'd be a problem. You trained him, trusted him, kept him close, and kept him in check. He wasn't as sharp as you, but he had fire, charisma, and most importantly, he had your will. Literally. While Brutus and Cassius were still covered in your blood, Antony was plotting his next move, carefully and coldly. At your funeral, he plays the crowd like a seasoned politician, not with rage, but with grief. He reads your will aloud, land for the people, money for every citizen. You even left them your gardens. Your last gesture wasn't about power, it was about generosity. And the moment Antony reveals that, the crowd turns. Rome erupts, riots, fires. Effigies of the conspirators are burned in the streets. People start hunting down those rumoured to be involved in your death. Brutus and Cassius go from liberators to fugitives in a matter of hours. It's almost funny, in a bitter Roman way. They thought by removing you, they were saving the Republic. Instead, they accelerated the end of it. Because now, with you gone, there's a vacuum, and nature, politics, and angry mobs all hate vacuums. Antony steps into the void, but not alone. Here's where it gets juicy. There's a new player in town, young, 18, not especially muscular, kind of awkward, but absolutely ruthless beneath the surface. His name? Gaius Octavius. You knew him as your grandnephew, but in your will, you named him your adopted son and heir. His new name? Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus. That's right. Caesar is now a franchise, and Octavian wastes no time stepping into that name. At first, Antony underestimates him. Most people do. He's just a kid, right? Wrong. Octavian is not you. He's colder, less charming, more calculating. But what he lacks in charisma, he makes up for in strategy. He plays every side. The Senate, the people, the military. He aligns with your veterans, promises them land, calls himself the rightful heir. And slowly, he begins to build something terrifying, a second Caesar. Antony sees the threat too late. And so, in classic Roman fashion, the men who once loved you now turn on each other. Brutus and Cassius flee to the east, rallying legions in Greece and Asia Minor. They know war is coming. There's no political solution left. There's just swords. The battle that follows is not some noble contest of ideals. It's brutal, desperate. It culminates in 42 BCE at the Battle of Philippi. On one side, Brutus and Cassius, leading the forces of the Old Republic. On the other, Antony and Octavian, marching under the banner of vengeance and your legacy. And what happens? Cassius dies first. He believes the battle is lost, wrongly, as it turns out, and orders his own slave to stab him. A grim end for a man who once believed himself the mastermind of a Rome's salvation. Brutus lasts a little longer. He fights a second battle weeks later. This time, the loss is real, and like his ancestor centuries before, he chooses to fall on his own sword rather than be paraded through the streets of Rome in chains. And just like that, the Republic's last defenders are gone. It's worth pausing here, because this is the moment everything becomes clear. You weren't just the end of the Republic, you were the test of whether it could survive, and it failed. Not because you killed it, but because the men who tried to restore it after you had no idea how to govern without you. They didn't fix the system. They couldn't even hold it together for 2 years. It's also worth mentioning that, in their final moments, neither Brutus nor Cassius seemed especially triumphant. Their suicides weren't symbolic victories. They were acts of defeat, acts of recognition. The world they thought they were saving was already gone. Here's a strange historical footnote. After the battle, Antony finds Brutus's body, and rather than desecrate it, he orders a proper burial. Maybe it's respect, maybe it's politics, maybe it's guilt, or maybe it's just Roman theatre. In Rome, everything is performance, even grief. But none of that matters anymore, because the Republic is now a word, not a reality. The Senate still exists, technically. Laws are still passed, speech is still given, but everyone knows where the power is drifting, toward Octavian, toward the name he now carries, toward a future that looks a lot like empire. And all it took was one man's death. Yours. Now the air starts to thicken. You're gone. Brutus is gone. Cassius is gone. And all that's left is a smouldering Rome and 2 very ambitious men circling each other like wolves, Mark Antony and Octavian. They've defeated the liberators together, yes, but don't mistake that for trust. This isn't friendship. This is a temporary ceasefire between 2 very different kinds of predators, and the only reason they're not already at each other's throats is because of something you left behind. Cleopatra. Yeah, her again. The Queen of Egypt. The woman who once welcomed you into her gilded palace, wrapped you in silk sheets, and let you imagine yourself as a god among mortals. She's still here, still ruling, and still dangerous, but not in the way Rome likes to pretend. They call her a seductress, a manipulator, a foreign threat. But really, she's just smarter than most of the men she deals with. She doesn't bend to Rome, she negotiates with it. And now, with you gone, she sets her eyes on your former lieutenant, Antony. At first, it's all diplomacy. Antony sails east, meets her in Tarsus, calls her to account for Egypt's lukewarm support during the civil war. But Cleopatra doesn't beg. She arrives like a goddess, literally. She sails up the river on a golden barge, dressed as Aphrodite, lounging beneath a canopy of purple sails, with boys fanning her and musicians playing softly. She doesn't come to plead. She comes to conquer using every tool at her disposal. And Antony, he's helpless. He falls for her like a stone dropped into the Nile, and not just for her beauty, which, by the way, scholars argue wasn't the Hollywood variety. Some even suggest her power came from her voice, her mind, her presence. Whatever it was, it worked. Antony leaves behind his Roman wife, his duties, even his instincts. He stays in Egypt, he drinks, he laughs, he fathers children. He becomes, in Roman eyes, something less than Roman. Meanwhile, Octavian is back in Rome, quietly sharpening his knives. He doesn't move fast. He waits, watches, builds alliances. He doesn't have Antony's fire or your charisma, but he has something even more dangerous: discipline. While Antony is throwing feasts with Cleopatra, Octavian is whispering to the Senate. He's selling a story, a simple one. Antony has betrayed Rome, that's the message. Over and over, Antony is under the spell of a foreign queen. Antony's giving away Roman lands to his children with Cleopatra. Antony is dressing like an Egyptian, calling himself a god, preparing to rule from Alexandria, not Rome. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter. It sticks. The optics are terrible, and Octavian knows how to weaponize a rumour better than a sword. And then he plays his masterstroke. He obtains a copy of Antony's will, possibly illegally, and reads it aloud in the Senate. The contents are explosive. Antony wants to be buried in Egypt beside Cleopatra. He's left huge bequests to their children. He's bypassed the Senate entirely in shaping the future of Rome's eastern provinces. It's a PR disaster, and Octavian milks it for all it's worth. Suddenly, the quiet, awkward heir becomes the saviour of Rome, standing firm against a man who's gone soft, foreign and traitorous. War becomes inevitable, but it's not framed as a civil war. That would be messy, and Octavian is nothing if not careful. So he doesn't declare war on Antony. He declares war on Cleopatra. That way, it's patriotic, clean, Roman. And so, in 31 BCE, the two sides meet for the final showdown, the Battle of Actium. It's not a romantic duel, it's a grim naval clash off the western coast of Greece, fought with ships, fire, and desperation. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet is larger but disorganised. Octavian's is tight, disciplined, led by the brilliant General Agrippa. The winds shift. Cleopatra panics, or maybe she sees the writing on the wall and sails away mid-battle. Antony follows, and just like that, the battle is over. Octavian wins. It's not just a military victory, it's a world-altering moment. Cleopatra and Antony retreat to Alexandria, where they hold out for a while, but it's clear the story is ending. Octavian marches in. They throw lavish parties as if to pretend the walls aren't closing in, but they know, and eventually they make their choices. Antony, hearing, falsely, that Cleopatra has killed herself, falls on his sword. It doesn't work right away. He bleeds out slowly, painfully, and is carried to her, dying in her arms. A final, brutal romance. Cleopatra, when she sees that her defeat is complete, follows. She chooses her own death. The method? Unclear. The legend says an asp, a venomous snake, hidden in a basket of figs. Scholars debate it. Poison? A blade? We'll never know. What we do know is this. With her death, Egypt becomes Roman. The last independent kingdom in the Mediterranean falls, and Octavian becomes the uncontested ruler of the Roman world. No more rivals, no more co-consuls, no more drama. Well, okay, less drama. But here's the eerie part. This isn't just the end of Antony and Cleopatra. This is the final nail in the coffin of the Republic. There's no going back now. The Senate is still technically there, but it's ceremonial. Octavian doesn't call himself king. He's smarter than that. He takes the title princeps, first citizen. He's offered total power, and he humbly accepts. A dictator in everything but name. And here's the cherry on top. In 27 BCE, the Senate gives him a new title, Augustus. He becomes the first emperor of Rome, Not you. Him. You paved the road. He walked it. And the people love him. Because he brings peace. He ends the chaos, the civil wars, the famine, the uncertainty. For the first time in a generation, Rome can breathe. Temples are rebuilt. Trade returns. Roads stretch like arteries across the continent. And in the centre of it all is a man wearing your name. So let's recap the cosmic joke. They killed you to save the Republic. But in doing so, they guaranteed it would never return. Because no one could fill your place without becoming something entirely new. Something bigger. Something called Emperor. And now, even Cleopatra, your brilliant tragic counterpart, is gone. She tried to stand outside of Rome, tried to beat it at its own game, and in the end she too became a story. One sewn into your legacy, whether you wanted her there or not. You changed the world. But it turns out the world had more changing to do. And now the Empire breathes. It's strange, isn't it? All that blood, all that shouting, all those bodies, yours, Brutus's, Cassius's, Antony's, Cleopatra's, just to end up with one man sitting at the top of the Roman world, quietly reorganising it to look more permanent. Octavian, now Augustus, doesn't march around calling himself a king. He lets others do the flattering. He keeps the Senate intact, keeps the temples standing, keeps the vocabulary familiar, but underneath it all, everything's changed. The Republic is still a name, but now it's just that, a name, a decorative shield covering the machinery of absolute power. He doesn't wear a crown, he wears patience. That's the real legacy you left behind, not just the dictatorship, not just the bold moves and bloody endings, but the idea that power, when it's wrapped in tradition and ceremony, becomes harder to spot. You were the fire that scorched the old world. Augustus is the architect who builds over the ashes, and build he does. He calls it the Principate, not an empire. He insists he's just the first among equals. But come on, we all know better. He controls the armies, the treasury, the provinces, the law. He chooses successors. He even redefines time. He takes a month, your month July, and names the one that follows it August after himself. Because if you get a piece of the calendar, so does he. Fringe fact. To make sure no one gets offended by his month having fewer days than yours, he adds a day to August. That's right. He steals a day from February just to match your month. Petty? Maybe. But that's empire. Power measured in the tiniest symbols. So here we are, with Augustus in charge, Rome expanding, and the new imperial system solidifying. You'd think this is where the story starts to fade. You're dead, after all. Burned, buried, mourned. But no, you don't disappear. You evolve. Because Augustus doesn't just rule in your name. He deifies you. You, Julius Caesar, become a god. Not metaphorically, not in a poetic, legends never die kind of way. Officially, religiously. The Senate votes you divine honours. A temple is built in the Forum, the temple of the divine Julius, and your image is carved into altars and worn on amulets. You become Divus Julius, and priests are appointed to oversee your cult. Actual Roman priests, with robes and incense and prayers. It's a brilliant move on Augustus's part, because if you're a god, then he's the son of a god. Not just your heir, but your spiritual descendant. That gives him divine legitimacy, a holy glow to go with his political genius. It's a marketing dream. Augustus becomes not just the man who saved Rome, but the one chosen by the heavens to do so. And the people eat it up, especially when the gods send a sign. Because here comes the weird part, the part that really tips your legacy into the realm of mythology. Right after your death, during games held in your honour, a comet appears in the sky over Rome. It's visible for several days, bright enough to see even in the daylight. The people look up, squint, and whisper the obvious. That's Caesar. That's his soul, ascending to the heavens. Augustus doesn't fight this interpretation. He embraces it. Hard. He even puts a star on coins to represent the divine star of Julius. And that image, the blazing comet, is plastered across the empire. Temples, mosaics, even graffiti. Your death becomes not just a turning point, but a cosmic event. Let that sink in. You didn't just change politics, you changed the sky. Now, you might think this is the peak of weirdness, but hold tight. Because the imperial cult, the system that worships dead emperors, becomes a central part of Roman life. Cities across the empire build shrines to you, priests offer sacrifices, birthdays are celebrated, you go from mortal to martyr to immortal, all in the span of a few years. And here's where the scholars argue. Was this real religious belief? Did people truly think you were divine, or was it just politics dressed in robes? Some say the people believed it deeply. Others say it was all just propaganda, top-down control with a spiritual mask. The truth, as usual, probably lies in the middle, because humans are complicated. We grieve through ritual, we process trauma through myth, and your death was traumatic. For Rome, for your supporters, even for your enemies. Turning you into a god may have been the only way to make sense of it all, and honestly, it worked. You become more powerful after death than you ever were in life. Your name becomes a title. Caesar no longer means you, it means ruler. Every emperor after Augustus takes it. Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, they all call themselves Caesar. The name outlives the man. Even centuries later, in far-off lands, the echo lingers. Kaiser in Germany, Tsar in Russia. Both descend linguistically from Caesar. Your name spreads like a virus, mutating across languages, continents, and governments, and still it survives. Because while Augustus is tidying up the empire and putting marble over the cracks you left behind, he's also writing your legacy. He controls the narrative. He positions himself as your true heir, your moral successor, the guy who fixed what you started. And you become the threshold, the before and after, the final moment of the Republic, the spark that lit the new world. People begin to ask, what would Caesar have done? And later, what would Caesar allow? And eventually, would Caesar approve of me? You become the silent judge of all who follow you. That's the true power of a myth. So while Augustus rules in your shadow, he never quite escapes it. No one does, because for all his careful planning, for all his success, he knows he never was you. He was safe, quiet, methodical. You were chaos wrapped in charm, fire in a man's shape. He may have inherited your title, your power, even your calendar, but he never inherited your spirit. That apparently couldn't be passed down, because it wasn't Roman anymore. It was divine. So now Rome has an emperor, even if no one wants to say the word out loud. Augustus plays the role perfectly, modest, careful, draped in just enough humility to keep the Senate comfortable and the people cheering. But underneath the robes and ceremonies, he's holding all the levers, and the machine of empire begins to hum, sleek and dangerous, stretching its fingers across Europe, North Africa, the Middle East. A world once governed by a chaotic mix of laws and personalities now bows to something new. Imperial order. And you're still there. In statues, coins, shrines, in the way people name their sons, in the stories soldiers tell around campfires. You're not just a ghost in the system. You are the system, the blueprint, the justification. Every new Caesar that follows claims your legacy. Whether they're wise or wicked, brilliant or unhinged, they all point back to you like a divine permission slip. But let's look at the structure you left behind. Let's talk about what happens when the Republic becomes a shell, hollowed out but still standing. The Senate still meets, laws are still passed, but no one really believes in it anymore. It's like a theatre set left standing after the play has ended. People walk by and nod, but no one goes inside. This kind of government, where the old symbols stay but real power belongs to one man, isn't unique to Rome. It shows up again and again throughout history. The managed republic, the illusion of choice, the comfort of familiarity. And every time it does, someone finds a way to invoke your name. Because you did it first, and because you made it look good. But even as Augustus wraps the empire in peace, we all know what's coming. This kind of order, built on a single person's strength and a borrowed legacy, can only last so long before cracks start to show. It's one thing to inherit a throne, it's another thing to be worthy of it. And the heirs? Well, they're not you. Let's be honest. The imperial line that follows is more soap opera than statesmanship. Tiberius is brilliant but miserable. Caligula is chaos incarnate, appoints his horse to office and probably goes insane. Claudius is the nervous scholar who accidentally becomes emperor and does surprisingly well, until he's poisoned by his fourth wife. Nero, of course, plays the lyre while Rome burns, murders his mother, and declares himself an artist. Not exactly a golden age. But each one of them still calls himself Caesar, still claims your blood, your spirit, your approval, even when they're burning things down or laughing through executions. That's the weight of your name. It elevates, but it also excuses. It justifies. If Caesar did it, maybe I can too, even if it is total madness. And yet, the people accept it. That's the terrifying part. Rome doesn't revolt every time a bad emperor rises. Sometimes they mutter, sometimes they grumble, but mostly they endure. Because the Republic is gone, and the Empire is the only thing left standing. It's not that they love every Caesar, it's that they love the idea of Caesar, the safety of it, the shape of it, the familiar rhythm of one man at the top. And this rhythm lasts for centuries. That's what makes it so remarkable. From Augustus in 27 BCE to the fall of Constantinople in 1453 CE, Rome lasts over 1400 years after your death. Not always stable, not always glorious, but undeniably Roman, and your fingerprint is on every inch of it. Let's not forget the sheer scope of what follows. The Roman Empire becomes the largest political entity the Western world had ever seen. Roads, aqueducts, cities, walls, the legal systems, the languages, the architecture, the obsession with eagles and marble and authority, all of it is born in the post-Caesar world. You never saw it, but you made it possible. And here's the open debate scholars still wrestle with. Was the empire inevitable? If you hadn't crossed the Rubicon, if you hadn't claimed dictatorial power, if you'd somehow died quietly of old age, would Rome have stayed a republic? Some say yes. That you shattered the structure too fast, too violently. That you rushed into kingship with a crown made of arrogance. Others say no, that the republic was already broken. That the corruption, the inequality, the chaos, it had already made way for something else. You just moved first. You saw what was coming and decided to lead the stampede rather than be crushed by it. It's a tough question, and one that never really gets answered, because we only get the version of history that survives, and in this case the version that survived is the one where you win, not with armies or speeches or politics, but with memory, with narrative, with endurance. You weren't the last Roman of the Republic. You were the first Roman of something new, and the echoes never stopped. Even as the Western Roman Empire collapses under its own weight in the 5th century, your name survives in the East. The Byzantine Empire, as we now call it, continues to use the title of Caesar. In Greek it becomes Kaiser, and eventually the term Basileus, which replaces it, still carries your shadow. Even the Ottoman sultans, who conquer Constantinople in 1453, refer to themselves as Caesar of Rome in official documents. That's right, the title outlives the empire, you outlive the empire, and that's just the beginning. In Russia, the rulers adopt the title Tsar, a direct translation of Caesar. The idea? That they're the rightful inheritors of Roman authority. In Germany, it's Kaiser. In England, kings crown themselves with a lineage that traces, albeit very loosely, back to Roman imagery, Roman legitimacy, Roman law. It's everywhere. Even in modern times, people still compare strong leaders to you, both admiringly and critically. The label Caesar is shorthand for authoritarianism, for brilliance, for danger, for greatness. It's a compliment and an accusation rolled into one, and there's a deep discomfort in that, isn't there? Because while the Republic's ideals, equality under law, checks and balances, citizen leadership, still inspire modern democracies, your story serves as the dark twin, the reminder that one man can end all that. That sometimes the system doesn't collapse because of its enemies, but because it's handed over, willingly, to someone who simply moves faster than the rest. Someone who speaks clearly while others argue. Someone who offers certainty instead of debate. Someone who looks very, very much like you. So here we are, standing at the end of the world you helped build, surrounded by its ruins and its reflections. The Republic died with you. The Empire lived without you. But your name never left. It carved itself into marble and memory, into language and law, into both democracy and dictatorship. And every time someone climbs a podium, calls themselves the people's voice, and then starts trimming the rules, your shadow falls across the stage. They don't always say your name, but you're always there. And here, finally, we arrive at the edge of your long wandering shadow, the part where history looks back, squints through the smoke, and tries to understand just what it was you did to us. Not just Rome, not just the Senate or Brutus or Antony or even Cleopatra, but all of us. Every civilization that's come after, every political thinker, every dictator, every dreamer who thinks they can fix a broken system by stepping in and saying, "Trust me, I've got this." Because let's be honest, this was never just about a man getting stabbed in a building. It was about what that man represented, about what kind of power a human being should ever be allowed to hold, and more importantly, what happens to the people who let him have it. Let's sit with that for a moment. You started as a young patrician in a fading republic, broken, politically endangered, dodging Sulla's kill lists. You ended as a god, declared divine by the very Senate that once feared you. That arc, from vulnerable nobody to eternal legend, isn't just rare, it's irresistible. It becomes a kind of gravitational pull for every generation that follows, because it promises something intoxicating, that you can be the one to take it all, to bend the world toward your will, and have history thank you for it. And in some twisted way, history did thank you. Sort of. Because while the Republic gasped and choked on your ambition, the empire that followed brought stability. It brought roads, laws, bridges, peace, if you ignored the whole conquest and slavery part. For centuries the Pax Romana was real. Augustus made sure of that. But he couldn't have done it without you. You weren't the first emperor, but you were the justification for having one, the story that made it all feel inevitable. And the world learned that lesson well. It keeps learning it. Because the playbook you wrote, Step 1, win the people, Step 2, build your image, Step 3, make them believe you're the only option, has been reused more times than we can count. Sometimes with flags, sometimes with marches, sometimes with military uniforms or business suits or 3-hour press conferences. It's all the same bones under different skin. You gave the world a formula. Here's a fringe detail that might make you smirk. In the 20th century, the fascist party in Italy adopted the Roman salute, not because they had historical proof that Romans actually used it, but because it felt Roman, because it reminded people of empire, of control, of Caesar, and Mussolini. He made a point to draw a direct line from you to him, as if you'd passed the torch, and he was the next great saviour of a decaying state. Of course, we know how that worked out, but that's the danger of your myth. It doesn't just inspire the cautious, it emboldens the bold, it's seductive. Your name is not just a lesson, it's a temptation. And yet, there's another side to your story that survives, one that doesn't involve empires or tyrants or rallies. It's the story of brilliance, of a man who outthought his enemies, who understood the psychology of crowds, who knew how to present ideas with just enough ambiguity that everyone saw what they wanted to see. A man who could campaign and conquer and write prose so sharp, it still gets assigned in university Latin classes. Yes, Julius, your commentaries are still being translated, analysed and underlined by students with highlighters and too much coffee. Your battlefield reports are models of clarity and persuasion. You didn't just fight Gaul, you sold the war to Rome like a master marketer, and the way you spoke, still legendary. Even Cicero, the greatest orator of your time, admitted that your speeches could make a crowd cry, shout, or riot if you wanted them to. But was it worth it? That's the question people still ask, that scholars still fight over. Was the death of the Republic a tragedy, or was it a necessary collapse? Was your rise a failure of institutions, or a failure of men too afraid to change the system before it broke? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. You didn't come out of nowhere. Rome made you. It built a culture where wealth bought influence, where elections were bribery wrapped in togas, where the Senate became a boys' club of rich men afraid of losing their grip. Rome made promises to the people and then broke them. Repeatedly. You didn't kill the Republic in one clean stab. You were just the moment it finally stopped pretending to be alive, and that's maybe the most honest reading of your legacy, not as a destroyer, but as a revealer. You showed Rome what it already was, and what it couldn't be anymore. The people who stabbed you hoped they were restoring the past, but they were wrong. They weren't killing tyranny, They were killing the future they were too afraid to face, and the future, like you, refused to die. It rose, slowly, unstoppably, with a laurel wreath and a new name, Empire. So what does that leave us with? A world forever circling your story. Every generation looks at its own politics and asks, are we Rome? Is this our Caesar moment? It's a strange sort of immortality. Not just being remembered, but being used as a measuring stick, a warning label, a metaphor. You're no longer just a man. You're a moral benchmark, a before and after, etched into history. And yes, we still teach your name to kids in school. We still perform your death on stage. We still make jokes about the Ides of March on social media. You, Caesar, have officially outlived your own timeline. Even in death you move the needle. So as we close this chapter, we're left not with a clean resolution, but a loop. A circular story that keeps replaying itself in palaces, in parliaments, in protests. Every time power shifts hands, every time someone rises for the good of the people, every time a system breaks and a single figure steps in promising to fix it, you flicker back into view, still watching, still warning, still waiting. So now the lights fade, the echoes of the Senate fall quiet, and the blades are tucked away, at least for tonight. You've followed the whole arc, from backroom plots and battlefield speeches to foreign queens and burning cities. You've walked with Julius Caesar from his skinny, ambitious beginnings to the bloody floor of the Curia and beyond, through empire, mythology, and centuries of borrowed legacy. And here, in the quiet after, maybe you feel it, the strange stillness of understanding. Not just about Caesar the man, but Caesar the mirror, because that's what his story really is, a reflection of us, of power, of how we love it, fear it, and keep handing it to those who promise to make things simple. There's a kind of cosmic exhaustion in that, isn't there? And yet oddly some comfort too, because Caesar doesn't vanish. He lingers, teaching us, not through sermons, but through tension, through contradiction, through that lingering question that never really gets answered. Was it the man who failed the system, or the system that failed the man? You don't have to decide tonight. Instead, just rest here for a while. Let the marble fade back into shadows. Let the distant roar of the forum turn to wind. Imagine the torches burning low, the chariots silent, the stars wheeling overhead like the comet that once told Rome a god had died, and something far stranger had taken his place. You've made it through the Ides, you've survived Caesar, and now it's time to sleep.